Tonight I will read a reimagined telling drawn from a beloved classic, and you may, if you wish, make yourself comfortable beneath your blanket and gently let your eyelids rest. Chapter 1, which bears the sign of a beginning, concerns a descent, yes indeed, a true and utterly startling descent into a burrow. Elara had grown extraordinarily weary of sitting beside her older cousin Mira on the grassy bank, with absolutely nothing whatsoever to occupy her hands or her mind. Once, and then again a second time, she had leaned over to peek into the volume Mira was reading, yet she found in those pages neither illustrations to delight the eye nor dialogues to stir the ear, and she thought very candidly to herself, what possible use is a book, what use at all, if it contains no pictures and no conversations? So she weighed, as best she could while the heat of the day made her feel drowsy in a very real and pressing way, whether the pure, simple pleasure of threading daisies into a long, dear little chain would justify the considerable effort of actually rising, walking, and plucking the blooms. At precisely that moment, a white-furred creature with unmistakably pink eyes, a pale hair, rushed very close past her. There was nothing outrageously unparalleled in a hare running by, and Elara did not, at first, find it wildly irregular to hear the creature mutter distinctly to itself, oh dear, I shall be terribly late. When she thought about it afterwards, and she did quite carefully, it came to her that she truly ought to have marveled at such a thing. Nevertheless, in that exact instant, it felt curiously natural, as if the world had always allowed hares to fret audibly about their schedules. But when the pale hare drew from the pocket of its waistcoat an actual watch, lifted it for a quick look, and then scurried off again with renewed urgency, Elara sprang to her feet, for a sudden spark lit her mind. She had never in all her days seen any hare, whether wild or tame, wearing a waistcoat with a pocket at all, nor a watch that could be taken out of such a pocket. A blaze of curiosity took hold of her, and she dashed across the field in pursuit. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, depending upon one's taste for adventures, she arrived just in time to watch the creature plop down into a broad burrow's mouth beneath the hedge. In the very next breath, Elara plunged after it, neglecting entirely to ask herself, even for the smallest instant, how she planned to find her way back again. The burrow stretched forward like a proper tunnel for a while, then pitched without warning sharply downward, so abruptly, in fact, that Elara had not a spare fraction of a moment to consider stopping before she realized she was falling into a very deep shaft indeed. Either the shaft was immeasurably deep, or else she herself was descending particularly slowly, because she had plenty of time as she went down to look about and wonder, truly wonder, what in the world would happen to her next. At first she tried to look beneath her feet to see what she might be approaching, but it was far too dark for sight to be of any use whatsoever. Then she turned her eyes to the sides of the shaft and noticed with amazement that its walls were fitted with cupboards and bookshelves. Here and there maps and pictures were hung upon small pegs, like odd decorations in a very peculiar house. As she passed one shelf, she took down a jar, managed it quite neatly in midair, and discovered that its label read, orange marmalade. To her very great disappointment, it was a real and stinging disappointment. The jar proved empty. She was unwilling to let it fall, fearing she might strike and injure somebody far below, so she twisted about with careful effort and tucked it back into one of the cupboards, sliding it in as she dropped past. Well then, Elara thought to herself, after such a fall as this, I do declare I shall not think anything at all of tumbling downstairs. How courageous everyone at home will consider me. Why, I should not breathe a word of complaint, even if I were to slip from the top of a house. Very likely there was much truth in that. Down and still down and down again she went. Will this plunge never ever end? She wondered aloud. I do so very much wonder how many miles I have fallen by now. She added, to keep herself company, I must be getting near the center of the world. Let me think, would that be about 4,000 miles beneath the surface? Yes, I believe so, for Elara had been taught a handful of such facts in her lessons, and although there was absolutely no audience present to admire her knowledge, she felt it good practice to recite to herself exactly the sorts of things teachers like to hear. Yes, that is roughly the distance, she reasoned. But then, I do honestly wonder what latitude or longitude I have arrived at. She had not the slightest clear idea what latitude truly meant, nor longitude either, although she thought they were wonderfully grand words to pronounce. Soon she began again. I wonder whether I might fall completely through to the other side. What an odd and laughable sight it would be to step out among people who walk with their heads, as it were, pointed downward, the antipathies, I think. She was glad indeed that no one heard that, because she felt deeply that the word did not sound properly chosen. Well then, she continued bravely, I shall be obliged to ask the name of the country when I arrive. I will say, please, ma'am, would you be so kind as to tell me, is this South Zephyria, or is it East Australies? She tried to drop a little curtsy as she spoke. Imagine attempting a curtsy while tumbling through the air. And she asked herself honestly whether anyone could possibly manage such a thing. And what a truly ignorant girl they will judge me to be if I ask that, said Alara. No, it will never do to ask. Perhaps I shall discover it written somewhere upon a sign. Down she continued, with nothing else to be done. So, very soon, Alara took to speaking again. Nina will miss me dreadfully tonight, I am quite certain, she said. Nina was her cat, dear creature that she was. I do hope they will remember her saucer of milk at tea time. Nina, my dear one, how I dearly wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, I suppose. I fear there are none at all, but you might catch a bat, and a bat is very much like a mouse, you know. Then she paused. But do cats eat bats? I truly wonder. Growing drowsy, she murmured dreamily to herself, do cats eat bats? Do cats eat bats? And then, with her thoughts somersaulting, do bats eat cats? Since she could not answer either question in any convincing way, she decided it mattered very little which way around she asked it. She felt herself drifting toward sleep and had just begun to dream that she was walking hand in hand with Nina, speaking very earnestly to her. Nina, now at last, please tell me the truth. Did you ever eat a bat? When all at once, thump, thump, she landed upon a heap of dry sticks and leaves. The fall had ended. Alara was not hurt in the least, not even a little, and she stood up at once. She looked up, but above her it was still all darkness. Before her stretched another long passage, and far ahead she could just make out the pale hare still hurrying along in a great rush. There was no time whatsoever to waste. Alara darted forward like the wind, arriving just in time to hear it exclaim, as it turned a corner, My ears and whiskers, how frightfully late it grows! She reached the corner close upon its heels, but the creature had already vanished. She found herself in a long, low hall illuminated by a row of lamps suspended from the ceiling. Doors circled the room entirely, yet each one proved locked. After Alara had gone all the way down one side and then up the other, trying every door with growing frustration, she walked sadly down the center, wondering in a very serious way how she could possibly get out. Suddenly she came upon a small three-legged table made entirely of solid glass. Nothing lay upon it except a tiny golden key, and Alara's first thought was that it might belong to one of the doors. Alas, either those locks were far too large or the key was far too small. In any event, not a single one would open. On her second circuit of the hall she noticed, half hidden, a low curtain she had not seen before. Behind it was a small door, no more than 15 inches high. She tried the golden key in its lock and, to her intense delight, found that it fit perfectly. Alara opened the door and discovered that it led to a very narrow corridor, hardly bigger than a rat's passage. She knelt and peered along it, and beyond the tiny corridor she saw the loveliest garden imaginable. Beds of brilliantly colored flowers and fountains whose water looked so cool that, merely to behold them, one felt freshly awake. How she longed at last, to leave that gloomy hall and wander among those flower beds and sparkling pools. But she could not even push her head through the doorway, and even if she could manage her head, she thought with sadness, it would be of very little use without her shoulders. "Oh, if only I could fold myself up like a telescope," she said. "I think I could do it if only I knew where to begin." So many extraordinary events had happened in rapid succession that Alara had started to consider that very few things, if any at all, were truly impossible. As there seemed no sense in waiting by the little door, she returned to the glass table, half hoping to find another key there, or at the very least a printed book of instructions titled, "Rules for Folding People Up Like Telescopes." This time she discovered a small bottle standing upon the table, and she was entirely certain it had not been there before. Looped around its neck was a paper label on which were printed, in very large letters and very handsome script, the words, "Drink me." It was all well and good for the bottle to say, "Drink me," but wise little Alara was not about to obey in haste. "I shall look first," she told herself, "and see whether it says poison anywhere." She had read several very instructive tales in which children had been burned or devoured by fierce animals or suffered other dreadful fates simply because they forgot the most basic rules their elders had taught them. Rules such as, if you clutch a red-hot poker for too long, it will absolutely burn you, and if you slice your finger very deeply with a knife, it will ordinarily bleed, and never to be forgotten, if you drink from a bottle labeled poison, it will almost certainly disagree with you sooner or later, and not in a small way but in a quite dramatic way. This bottle, however, bore no such warning. So Alara ventured to taste it, and she found that its flavor was a curious, delightful mixture. Cherry tart and custard, pineapple and roast turkey, toffee and hot buttered toast. All at once and one after another. Finding it exceedingly pleasant, she quickly finished it. "What a singular sensation," Alara said. "I must be collapsing like a telescope being pushed closed." And indeed it was precisely so. She now measured only 10 inches in height. Her face brightened with the thought that she was the perfect size to slip through the small door into the glorious garden. First, however, she waited a few minutes to see whether she might continue shrinking, and she felt more than a little nervous because it might end, who could say, with her going out altogether, like the wick of a candle snuffed into nothing. "I wonder what I would be then," she mused, and she tried very hard to imagine exactly what the flame of a candle becomes after the candle is blown out, but she could not recall ever seeing such a thing. After a while, when nothing further happened, she decided to go straight away into the garden. Alas for poor Alara, when she reached the door, she realized she had forgotten the little golden key upon the table. When she returned to fetch it, she found there was no way to reach it whatsoever. She could see it clearly through the glass top, and she attempted, with all her small remaining strength, to climb one of the table's legs, but they were as slick as ice. After exhausting herself with these attempts, the poor small thing sat down and cried. "Come now, there is no use at all in crying like that," she scolded herself quite sharply. "I advise you to stop this very instant." She usually gave herself very excellent advice, though, to be entirely honest, she very seldom followed it. Sometimes she even rebuked herself so sternly that she brought tears afresh to her eyes. Once, she remembered it well. She had reproached herself for cheating at a game of croquet, a game she was, at that moment, playing against herself, for this curious child liked very much to pretend she was two people at once. It is no use, however, Alara thought, to pretend to be two people when there is scarcely enough of me left to make one respectable person. Soon her eye fell upon a little glass box lying under the table. She opened it and found within a very small cake, upon which words had been beautifully spelled out in currants. "Eat me." "Well then, I shall eat it," said Alara. "And if it makes me grow larger, I can reach the key, and if it makes me grow smaller, I can crawl beneath the door. So in either case, I shall get into the garden, and I do not mind which of those two things happens." She ate a small bite and asked, quite anxiously, "Which way? Which way?" holding one hand upon the top of her head to feel whether she was growing up or down. To her surprise, she remained exactly the same size. Of course, that is usually what happens when one eats cake, but Alara had so entirely accustomed herself to expecting nothing but extraordinary occurrences that ordinary life felt dull indeed. So she set herself to the task and very soon finished the whole cake. Chapter 2. The Pool of Tears. Curious, and yet curiouser still, Alara cried, so astonished that for a short moment she forgot how to shape her words in the ordinary way. Now I am unfolding, yes, unfolding, like the largest telescope ever made. Goodbye, feet. For when she glanced downward, her feet seemed almost lost to view, so greatly had the rest of her stretched away. Oh, my poor little feet, she lamented. Who shall put shoes and stockings upon you now, my dears? I am distinctly sure I shall be much too far away to concern myself with such matters. You must manage as best you are able. But I must be kind to them, she thought, or else they will carry me in directions I do not want to go. Let me see. Yes, I will give them a new pair of boots every Christmas. And she continued planning, speaking half aloud. They must go by the mail carrier, of course. How very funny it will seem to send presents to one's own feet. And what odd directions the package will require. I shall address it. To Alara's right foot, Esquire, hearthrug near the fender, with Alara's love. Oh, what complete and utter nonsense I am talking. At that very instant her head struck the ceiling of the hall, for now she measured more than 9 feet high. She immediately snatched up the little golden key and rushed to the garden door. Poor Alara. Lying on one side, she could, with one eye, peep into the garden. But to pass through was more hopeless than ever. She sat and began to cry again. You ought to be thoroughly ashamed of yourself, she said. A great girl like you, going on in this way. Stop immediately. I absolutely insist upon it. Yet she continued all the same, shedding what felt like gallons upon gallons of tears, until there was, truly, a broad pool around her, about 4 inches deep, spreading halfway down the hall. After some time she heard the soft patter of feet in the distance. She hastily wiped her eyes to see what might be coming. It was the pale hare returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one paw and a large fan in the other. He trotted along very quickly, muttering as he came, Oh, the Lady Regent, the Lady Regent. Will she not be furious if I have kept her waiting? Alara felt so utterly desperate that she was ready to ask help from anyone at all. So when the creature drew near, she began, in a very low and timid voice, If you please, sir. The hare jumped as if stung, dropped the gloves and the fan, and scurried away into the darkness as fast as ever he could. Alara picked up the fan and the gloves, and because the hall was exceedingly hot, she fanned herself continuously as she walked, talking to herself the whole while. Dear me, how strange everything is today. Yesterday, things continued in the usual way. I wonder whether I was altered in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost believe I can remember feeling a little different. But if I am not the same, then the pressing question becomes, who in the whole world am I? That is to say, what is my identity? Ah, there indeed lies the great puzzle. She began to consider all the children she knew who were about her age, to see whether she might have transformed into one of them. I am quite certain I am not Ada, she said, for her hair grows in such long ringlets, and mine does not go into ringlets at all. And I cannot be Mabel either because I know a great many things, and she knows very little indeed. Besides, she is herself, and I am most definitely me. Oh dear, how puzzling this entire affair is. Alara continued, I will attempt to discover whether I still remember all the things I used to know. Let me see, 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is, oh dear, at this rate I shall never reach 20. However, the multiplication table may not be the deciding matter. Let us try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome, and Rome, no, that is undeniably all wrong. I am certain I must have been changed into Mabel. I will try to recite a poem I know. She folded her hands upon her lap as if she were reciting lessons and began to repeat it. But her voice sounded hoarse and strange to her own ears, and the words failed to come in their customary way. "How does the little crocodile," she began, and then what came out was nothing like the usual rhyme, but rather a tangled, altered rendering that surprised her as it arrived. "Polish up his gleaming tail, and let the river's waters spill in shining sheets upon each golden scale. How cheerfully, yes, how cheerfully, he seems to grin, how neatly, even artfully, he spreads wide his claws." The lines felt unfamiliar, as if someone else had placed them in her mouth. She frowned, both confused and fascinated, because what she intended and what she produced were not matching in any recognizable fashion. She halted, startled by the sound of her own echo. "That is to say," she told herself with firm severity, "something very odd is going on. There is no doubt about it whatsoever. Not even a single doubt." She looked around. The hall, the rows of locked doors, the tiny door and the glass table, her great height and her very small hopes. It all made a muddle in her thoughts. She clutched the fan more tightly. "If only," she whispered with an earnestness that seemed to ring through the warm air, "if only I could find a proper way into that garden. It is so very, very beautiful that I feel certain, so much is this so, that I would forget every tear the moment I set my foot upon its paths." The warm air seemed to thicken, and Alara, still towering, fanned herself harder. "Perhaps," she reasoned, "if I keep absolutely calm and decidedly polite, the next creature I meet will not run away in fright." She slipped the kid gloves onto her enormous hands. One glove fit just at the tips of her fingers, which made her laugh in spite of everything. And then, feeling foolish about the laughter and foolish about the tears, she decided to speak to herself exactly as a very strict governess might. "Alara, my girl," she declared, "you will not despair. You will walk carefully, and you will be attentive to every small chance that offers itself." Saying so did not solve a single practical difficulty, not any at all, yet it steadied her. The pool of tears lapped at her ankles. She took a slow step, then another, and each step made small ripples, which caught the light of the hanging lamps as if they were throwing back a handful of tiny mirror flashes. "I shall not cry again," she said, and then, with absolute honesty, "or at least I shall try very hard indeed not to cry again." She tried the doors one more time, traveling the long oval of the hall, but they remained impossible, each lock as stubborn as before. "If only the pale hair had stayed," she sighed. "I would have pleaded, yes, pleaded, to please show me the way." Her mind returned to Nina. They must not forget her saucer, they must not forget it at all, not even for a moment, she insisted, as if the saying of it could carry the instruction to her home. The heat, the effort, the absurdity of trying to reason about capitals and multiplications that refused to be what they had always been. These things combined to make her hands tremble slightly. She pressed the fan to her cheek. "Calm, calm," she murmured. "That is to say, be still, Alara." Then, as if the hall itself had heard her appeal, there came the faintest draught, and the surface of the pool was stirred, and the lamps flickered just a little. She remembered the small door, and in a burst of hope she hurried back, forgetting for a moment how tall she was, and looked through with one eye again. The garden remained as enchanting as ever. "I will not give up," she said. "Not at all. Not in the least. Not even a single bit." And yet, at that precise moment, the world offered her no obvious path. She stood there, tall and perplexed, the kid gloves looking silly on her large hands, the fan clacking softly, the little door gleaming faintly beyond her reach as if it had a secret and would not tell it. Then she noticed the fan again, not merely as a comfort in the heat, but as an object with a purpose she had not considered. "Perhaps," she suggested to herself, "if I fan myself a great deal I might shrink, not by magic of course, but by some very sensible and entirely proper process." She fanned harder, and while she fanned, she recited, in the carefully explanatory manner of a child who wishes to be both precise and polite, everything she could think of that might reasonably happen. "That is to say," she concluded, "if I do not grow smaller, I shall at least be cooler, and that will be something." She fanned and fanned until a curious lightness took hold of her. The hall seemed less oppressive. If only, she breathed, the key were in my pocket already. At that thought she laughed again, softly, kindly at herself. For what pocket could possibly be big enough now for a key and a girl of such an extraordinary size? The pool of tears shifted once more. What a silly thing, she said, and then corrected herself firmly. That is to say, not silly, but unfortunate. She drew herself up as much as the ceiling would allow, and tried to choose, with all the courage she could gather, the next right action. Somewhere in the hall, very far off, a small echo answered her movements. Somewhere nearer, the faint scent of flowers from the garden crept through the crack of the little door, as if it wished to console her. Alara closed her eyes and, in a voice that trembled but did not break, promised, "I shall get there. I shall at last truly and indeed. And welcome, little fishes, glide right in, with gentle smiles upon your tiny jaws." Alara stopped herself at once. "I am entirely sure those are not the proper words," she said, and her eyes filled yet again, till the tears threatened to spill. "Then it must be true. Perhaps I am Mabel after all, and I shall be forced to live in that cramped, poky little house with almost no toys whatsoever and an overwhelming number of lessons to learn." She drew a breath, resolute. "No, I have made up my mind. If I truly am Mabel, I shall remain down here. It will do them no good to put their heads through the opening and call, 'Come up, dear.' I will only look upward and answer, 'Who am I then? Tell me that first. And if I am satisfied to be that person, I shall come. If I am not, I shall stay precisely here until I am somebody else.' But, oh dear," she burst out, the tears arriving all at once, "how I do wish they would lean down their heads, for I am so very, very tired of being all alone in this place." As she spoke, she glanced at her hands and was amazed to see that, during all this fretting and speaking, she had somehow slipped on one of the pale hare's little white kid gloves. "However did I manage that?" she wondered. "I must be getting smaller again." She stood and went to measure herself by the glass table. By her best estimate, she was now about 2 feet high and still diminishing rapidly. Very quickly she discovered the cause, the fan in her hand. She dropped it with haste, just in time to avoid vanishing altogether. "A narrow escape," declared Alara, genuinely alarmed by the sudden shift, and yet profoundly relieved to find she still existed in one whole piece. Now for the garden. She ran as fast as her small legs would carry her back to the little door. But alas, the door had swung shut again, and the tiny golden key lay upon the glass tabletop as before. "Matters are worse than ever," thought the poor child. "I have never been so very small as this, not ever, and I declare it is too much, far too much." As she uttered these words, her foot slipped, and in the next instant, splash! She was up to her chin in salty water. Her first idea was that she had fallen into the sea. "In that case," she told herself, "I can go home by railway." Alara had been to the seashore once in her life and had formed the most general of conclusions that wherever one goes along the coast of Old Albion, there are bathing machines bobbing in the waves, children digging with wooden spades, a row of lodging houses facing the water, and behind them a railway station. However, she soon realized that this was not the ocean at all, but the pool of tears she herself had cried when she was 9 feet tall. "I wish I had not cried so very much," said Alara as she paddled, trying to discover a way out. "I suppose I am to be punished by drowning in my own tears, and that will be a curious thing indeed. Yet everything has been curious today." Just then she heard a splashing a short distance away, and she swam nearer to see. At first she thought it must be a walrus or a hippopotamus. Then she remembered how very small she was now, and she soon made out that it was only a mouse who, like herself, had tumbled into the pool. "It will do me good to be useful," Alara decided. "Let me speak to this mouse. Everything down here is so irregular that I should not be astonished at all if it can talk." At any rate, there is no harm in trying. So she began carefully. Mouse, do you happen to know the way out of this pool? I am exceedingly tired of swimming round and round. A mouse over a mouse to a mouse. Oh, mouse, she added, recalling, rather vaguely, case endings from her brother's old grammar exercises. She had never addressed a mouse before, but she believed she had seen something very like that in a Latin book. The mouse looked at her with a curious, measuring expression and appeared even to wink one small eye, yet it said not a word. Perhaps it does not understand English, thought Alara. Very likely it is a French mouse who came over with the conqueror, for although she prided herself on knowing history, she had no clear sense of when any of those events had occurred. Yesterday or 1,000 years ago made little difference in her mind. So she tried again, this time in French. The very first sentence from her lesson book, Où est ma casquette? Where is my cap? The mouse gave a sudden leap, sending drops flying, and trembled all over with fright. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alara in a rush, afraid she had offended its feelings. I quite forgot. You do not like cats. Not like cats? Squeaked the mouse in a thin, passionate voice. Would you like them if you were me? Well, perhaps not, said Alara soothingly. Do not be angry, please. Yet she could not help herself from continuing, half to her own comfort as she floated lazily. I do so wish I could show you our cat, Nina. I think you would take a fancy to cats if only you could see her. She is such a dear, quiet creature. She sits by the fire, purring, oh so pleasantly, washing her face and licking her paws. She is wonderfully soft, and she is truly remarkable at catching mice. Oh, Alara broke off, mortified, for the mouse had bristled from nose to tail and looked thoroughly insulted. We shall not speak of her again if you would rather not. We shall not indeed, cried the mouse, trembling right to the tip of its tail. As if I would converse on such a subject. My family has always despised cats. Nasty, low, vulgar creatures. Do not let me hear that name again. Not even once. I will not, said Alara quickly, eager to change the topic. Are you fond of dogs? The mouse did not answer, so Alara hurried on, hopeful. There is such a charming little dog near our house. I should like to show you. A bright-eyed terrier, with very long, curly brown hair. He will fetch whatever you throw. He will sit up and beg for his dinner. He performs all sorts of clever tricks, half of which I cannot remember at the moment. He belongs to a farmer who says the dog is so useful that he is worth £100. He says the terrier kills all the rats and... Oh dear! Alara cried sorrowfully, for the mouse was swimming away as fast as possible, leaving a wake behind it. Mouse dear, she called softly after it. Do please come back, and we shall not speak of cats or dogs either, if you do not like them. When the mouse heard this, it turned, swam slowly back, and said very pale and in a trembling voice, To the shore. Let us reach the shore, and then I will tell you my history. Then you shall understand completely why I hate cats and dogs. It was high time to go, for the pool had become quite crowded. Birds and animals of every sort had fallen in. There was a duck, a dodo, a parrot, a young eagle, and several other curious creatures. Alara led the way, and the whole company swam toward the bank. Chapter 3. A caucus race and a long tail. They were, indeed, a most remarkable-looking party assembled upon the shore. Birds with their feathers bedraggled and sticking every which way, animals with their fur clinging tight to their sides, and all of them dripping wet, irritable, and uncomfortable. The first question, several voices declared at once, is how to get dry again. They held a consultation, and after a few minutes it felt entirely natural to Alara that she should be speaking familiarly with the group, as if she had known them all her days. She even drifted into a lengthy argument with the parrot, who eventually grew sulky and would only repeat, I am older than you and therefore must know better. Alara refused to concede this point without being told its age. and since the parrot flatly declined to say how old it was, there was nothing more to be done on that topic. At last the mouse, who seemed to command a certain authority among them, called out, "Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I shall have you dry in no time." They all sat at once in a large ring with the mouse in the middle. Alara kept her eyes fixed upon it anxiously, for she felt sure she would catch a dreadful cold if she did not get dry very soon. "Hum," said the mouse with an air of great importance. "Are you all ready? This is the driest thing I know. Silence, if you please." And it began the driest account imaginable. William, surnamed the Conqueror, whose cause the Pope regarded with favor, was speedily submitted to by the English, then being short of strong leaders and, of late, very much accustomed to invasions and conquests. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria. "Brrr," shivered the parrot. "I beg your pardon," said the mouse, frowning but in a polite manner. "Did you speak?" "Not I," said the parrot hastily. "I thought you did," replied the mouse. "I shall proceed." Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, declared for him, and even Stigand, the patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury, found it advisable. "Found what?" asked the duck. "Found it," said the mouse rather crossly. "Surely you know what find it means." "When I find a thing," said the duck, "it is generally a frog or a worm. The real question is, what did the Archbishop find?" The mouse ignored the quibble and hurried on. "Found it advisable to go, with Edgar Atheling, to meet William and offer him the crown. William's conduct at first was moderate, but the insolence of his Normans. How are you getting on, my dear?" the mouse asked, turning to Alara. "As wet as ever," said Alara in a melancholy tone. "It does not seem to dry me at all." "In that case," the dodo announced, rising very solemnly, "I move that the meeting be adjourned for the immediate adoption of more energetic remedies." "Speak in plain language," said the young eagle. "I do not know the meaning of half those long words, and what is more, I do not believe you do either." The eaglet bent its head to hide a smile, and some of the other birds tittered openly. "What I intended to say," remarked the dodo, offended, "was that the best method for getting us dry would be a caucus race." "What is a caucus race?" asked Alara, not because she cared much to know, but because the dodo had paused as if expecting someone to speak, and nobody else seemed inclined to do so. "Why," said the dodo, "the simplest way to explain it is to do it. And as you may wish to try the thing for yourself someday, I shall tell you how I managed it." First it marked out a racecourse in a rough circle. "The precise shape is immaterial," added the dodo grandly. Then all the company were stationed at intervals along the course. There was no 1, 2, 3, and away. They began when it suited them, and they stopped when it pleased them, so it was by no means easy to determine when the race had finished. However, when they had been running for half an hour or so, and were quite dry again, the dodo suddenly called out, "The race is over!" And they all crowded round, panting and demanding, "But who has won?" This question the dodo could not answer without a great deal of thought. It sat for a long time with one finger pressed upon its forehead, the very pose in which you often see portraits of a certain famous playwright, while the rest waited in silence. At last the dodo pronounced, "Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." "But who is to give the prizes?" asked the company in a chorus. "Why, she, of course," said the dodo, pointing one solemn finger at Alara. At once the entire party pressed around her, crying in a muddle of voices, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alara had not the faintest idea what to do. In despair she put her hand into her pocket and drew forth a small box of comforts. Happily, the salt water had not soaked them, and she handed them around as prizes. There proved to be exactly enough for one apiece. "She must have a prize herself, you know," said the mouse. "Of course," replied the dodo gravely. "What else have you in your pocket?" it asked, turning to Alara. "Only a thimble," Alara said sadly. "Hand it here," said the dodo. They crowded about again, and the dodo, with immense ceremony, presented the thimble to Alara. We beg you to accept this elegant thimble. When the brief speech concluded, they all cheered. Alara found the entire proceeding exceedingly absurd. Nevertheless, they all looked so serious that she did not dare to laugh. As she could think of nothing suitable to say, she simply bowed and received the thimble, wearing as solemn an expression as she could manage. The next business was to eat the comforts. This caused some noise and confusion, for the larger birds complained that they could hardly taste theirs, while the small ones choked and needed to be patted on the back. Eventually it was done, and they sat again in a ring begging the mouse for more. You promised to tell me your history, you know, said Alara, and to explain why you hate C and D. She whispered the initials, half afraid of annoying it again. Mine is a long and sorrowful tale, said the mouse, turning toward Alara with a sigh. It is a long tale, Alara said unexpectedly, looking with wonder at the mouse's actual tail. But why do you call it sorrowful? She kept puzzling over this while the mouse spoke, so that the story, in her mind's eye, arranged itself into a winding, tapering shape, rather like this. Grimclaw said to a small mouse he had met in the house, Come, let us both go to law. I have time and a cause. Refusal I shall not permit. This quarrel must be tried, for honestly this morning I have nothing else to occupy my mind. Said the mouse to Grimclaw, Such a trial, without jury, without judge, would waste our very breath. I will be judge and I will be jury, purred old, cunning Grimclaw. I shall hear the whole case, and my verdict will be death. You are not paying attention, said the mouse to Alara severely. What are you thinking about? I beg your pardon, said Alara humbly. I thought you had come to the fifth bend in your tale. I had not, cried the mouse sharply and very angrily. You have a not, said Alara, always eager to be helpful, glancing around anxiously. Oh, please let me help you to untie it. I shall do nothing of the sort, said the mouse, getting up and walking away. You insult me by talking such nonsense. I did not mean it, pleaded poor Alara. You know how easily one can be offended. The mouse only growled in reply. Please come back and finish your story, Alara called after it. The others joined in a chorus. Yes, please do. But the mouse only shook its head impatiently and walked faster. What a pity it would not stay, said the parrot as soon as the mouse was out of sight. An old crab took the opportunity to say to her daughter, Ah, my dear, let this teach you never to lose your temper. Hold your tongue, ma, said the young crab a little snappishly. You would try the patience of an oyster. I wish I had Nina here, indeed I do, Alara said aloud to no one in particular. She would bring it back at once. And who is Nina, if I may venture a question? Asked the parrot. Alara answered eagerly, for she was always willing to speak of her dear pet. Nina is our cat. She is an absolute marvel at catching mice. Oh, you cannot imagine. And I wish you could see her after birds. Why, she would eat a little bird as soon as look at it. This produced a most remarkable sensation in the company. Some birds left at once. An elderly magpie began wrapping itself carefully and muttering, I really must get home. The night air never suits my throat. A canary cried in a trembling voice to its children, Come away, my dears. It is high time you were all in bed. On various excuses they slipped off, and in a short while Alara found herself alone. I wish I had not mentioned Nina, she said to herself, melancholy again. Nobody down here seems to like her, and I am perfectly sure she is the best cat in the world. Oh, my dear Nina, shall I ever see you again, I wonder? And the poor child began to cry once more, for she felt very lonely and very low indeed. After a little while, however, she heard the faint patter of footsteps in the distance, and she looked up eagerly, half hoping that it was not the mouse after all, but the pale hare, trotting back at a cautious pace and peering anxiously this way and that, as though it had mislaid something precious. Alara heard it mutter, "The Lady Regent. Oh, the Lady Regent. My poor paws. My fur and whiskers will certainly be the end of me, as sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where in the world did I drop them?" In an instant Alara guessed it was hunting for the fan and the pair of white kid gloves. With the best intentions she began searching, but nothing was where it had been. Everything had shifted since her long swim. The grand hall, the glass table, the little door vanished, every bit of it. Very soon the pale hare spotted Alara wandering about and, in a severe tone, called, "Why, Marian? What are you doing outside? Run home this moment and fetch me a fan and a pair of gloves. Quickly now." Alara was so startled that she hurried off in the direction indicated without attempting to explain that she was not Marian at all. "It has mistaken me for its housemaid," she thought as she ran. "How astonished it will be when it discovers who I am. But I suppose I had better take it the fan and gloves, that is, if I can locate them." As she said this, she came upon a neat little house. Upon the door, a bright brass plate bore the inscription, "W. Hare." Alara stepped in without knocking and hurried upstairs, nervous that she might meet the real Marian and be turned out before she found what she sought. "How strange it is," Alara mused, "to be running errands for a hare. I should not be surprised if Nina starts sending me on errands next." She could hear it now, in her mind's best imitation of a nurse's voice. "Miss Alara, come here at once and prepare for your walk." And she would answer, "In just 1 minute, nurse, only I must be sure the mouse does not slip out." Then she shook her head. Although I do not believe they would allow Nina to remain in the house if she began ordering people about. By this time Alara had found a tidy little room with a window table. Upon it, just as she had hoped, lay a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of tiny white kid gloves. She took up the fan and a pair of gloves and was turning to leave when her eye fell upon a small bottle standing near the looking-glass. There was no label this time commanding "Drink me." Yet she pulled the cork and raised it to her lips. "Something interesting is certain to happen whenever I eat or drink anything down here," she told herself. "So I shall see what this bottle does. I do hope it will help me grow large again. For truly I am thoroughly tired of being such a very tiny little thing." It did so indeed, far faster than she expected. Before she had swallowed half, her head pressed against the ceiling, and she had to stoop at once to spare her neck. She set the bottle down in a hurry. "That is quite sufficient," she told herself. "I hope I shall not grow any more. As it is, I cannot get through the door. I do wish I had not drunk quite so much." Alas, too late for wishing. She continued to grow and grow. Very soon she had to kneel on the floor. In another minute there was not room enough even for that. She tried lying down, bracing one elbow against the door and curving the other arm around her head. Still she grew. As a last resort she thrust one arm out of the window and planted one foot up the chimney. "Now," she told herself, "I can do no more, whatever comes." Fortunately for Alara, the little bottle's magic had spent itself, and she grew no larger. Still, the situation was exceedingly uncomfortable, and with no reasonable prospect of ever squeezing out of that room again, it was no wonder she felt wretched. Home was ever so much pleasanter, thought poor Alara, where one is not forever getting bigger and smaller, and where mice and hares do not give orders. I almost wish I had not gone down that burrow. She paused. And yet, this life is, you must admit, rather curious. I do wonder what has happened to me. When I used to read fairy tales, I imagined such things never truly occurred. And now here I am, in the very middle of one. There ought to be a book written about me, yes indeed there ought. She considered. When I grow up, I shall write it. Then, with a sorrowful twist to her mouth, she added, "But I am grown up now, at least. There is no more room to grow up in here." Another thought came. Shall I never become any older than I am this minute? That would be a comfort in one way, never to be an old woman, but it would be dreadful in another, always to have lessons to learn. Oh, I should not like that. Oh, you foolish Alara, she answered herself. How could you learn lessons in here? There is hardly room even for you, and not any room whatsoever for the lesson books. And so she went on, debating with herself, first one side and then the other, quite as if she were conducting a proper conversation. After several minutes she heard a voice outside and stopped to listen. Marian, Marian, it called. Fetch my gloves this instant. Then came the patter of small feet upon the stairs. Alara knew the pale hare was coming to look for her. She trembled until the whole house shook, quite forgetting that she was now about 1,000 times larger than the hare and had not the least reason to be afraid. Presently the hare reached the door and tried to open it. But the door opened inward, and Alara's elbow was pressed hard against it, so the attempt failed. She heard it say, Then I shall go round and climb in at the window. That you shall not, thought Alara. She waited until she fancied the hare had come just beneath the window, then suddenly spread her hand and made a grab in the air. She caught nothing, but she heard a little shriek, a fall, and the crash of broken glass. Very likely, she concluded, it has tumbled into a cucumber frame, or something of that sort, some glass thing for growing vegetables. Next came the hare's angry voice, and then another voice she did not recognize. What are you doing there, Pat? Diggin' for apples, your honor. Digging for apples indeed, snapped the hare. Come and help me out of this. More glass broke. Now tell me, Pat, what is in that window? It's an arm, your honor. An arm, you goose. Who ever saw one of that size? Why, it fills the entire window. Sure enough it does, your honor, but it's an arm all the same. Well, it has no business there at any rate, said the hare. Go and take it away. There followed a long silence. Alara heard only whispers now and again. Sure, I'd not be touchin' it at all. And, do as you are told, you coward. Alara stretched her hand out once more and made another snatch in the air. This time she was rewarded with 2 small shrieks and more tinkling crashes. What a number of cucumber frames there must be, thought Alara. I wonder what they will try next. If they were able to pull me through the window, I should be pleased. I do not want to stay in here a moment longer. She waited a while, hearing nothing. At last came the rumble of little cartwheels and the buzz of many voices speaking at once. She made out, in fragments, Where's the other ladder? I did not think to bring but one. Bill has the other. Bill, bring it here, lad. Set him up at that corner. No, tie them together first. They do not reach half high enough yet. They will do well enough, do not fuss. Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope. Will the roof bear it? Mind that loose slate. It is coming down. Heads below. There was a great crash. Then the voices resumed. Now who did that? It was Bill, I fancy. Who is to go down the chimney? Nay, not I. You do it. That I will not. Then Bill is to go. Here, Bill. The master says you are to go down the chimney. So Bill must come down the chimney, has he? Said Alara to herself. They place everything upon poor Bill. I would not take Bill's place for a very great deal. She glanced up the chimney. This fireplace is narrow to be sure, but I believe I can manage a little kick. She drew her foot down as far as she could into the chimney and waited. Soon she felt a small creature. She could not tell what kind, scratching and scrambling just above. There goes Bill, she said, and with one sharp kick she sent him flying. There was a general outcry. There goes Bill! Then the hare's voice. Catch him! You there by the hedge! Silence. Then a fresh muddle of instructions. Hold up his head. Give him some brandy. Do not choke him. How is it with you, old fellow? Tell us the whole of it. At last came a faint squeak. That must be Bill, thought Alara. Well, I hardly know, no more, thank you. I am better now, terribly flustered. All I know is, something came at me like a jack in the box, and up I shot like a skyrocket. "So you did, old fellow," said several voices. "We must burn the house down," declared the hare. "If you do," Elara shouted as loudly as she could, "I shall set Nina upon you." Instant quiet. Elara wondered what would come next. If they had any sense whatsoever, she thought, they would remove the roof. After a minute or two, there was movement again. She heard the hare say, "A barrowful will do to begin with." A barrowful of what? Elara wondered. She did not have long to puzzle it out, for in the next instant a shower of little pebbles came rattling in at the window, some striking her face. "I shall put a stop to this," she told herself and cried out, "You would do better not to try that again." Another dead silence followed. Elara noticed, to her surprise, that the pebbles were turning into small cakes as they lay upon the floor. A bright idea came to her. "If I eat one," she thought, "it is certain to produce some change in my size, and as it cannot possibly make me larger, it must make me smaller." She swallowed a cake and was delighted to feel herself shrinking at once. As soon as she became small enough to pass through the doorway, she ran out of the house. Outside, a whole crowd of small animals and birds had gathered. Poor little Bill the lizard was in the middle, held up by 2 guinea pigs who were giving him something from a bottle. The moment Elara appeared, they all rushed toward her. But she took to her heels and ran as fast as she could, and very soon she was safe within a thick wood. "The first task," said Elara, as she wandered among the trunks, "is to grow back to my proper size. The second is to find my way into that lovely garden. That will be the best possible plan." Certainly sounded an excellent plan, neat and simple. The difficulty was that she had not the faintest idea how to accomplish it. While she peered anxiously among the leaves, a sharp little bark, just above her head, made her look up quickly. An enormous puppy gazed down at her with big round eyes, stretching out one paw in a feeble attempt to touch her. "You poor small darling," said Elara in her most coaxing tone, trying even to whistle to it. She was terribly frightened all the same, thinking it might be hungry, and if it were hungry, it might very well eat her up despite all her coaxing. Hardly knowing what she did, Elara picked up a tiny stick and held it out. The puppy leapt into the air with a yelp of joy, all 4 feet off the ground, and chased the stick at once. Elara dodged behind a great thistle to avoid being knocked over. The moment she stepped out on the other side, the puppy made another rush and tumbled head over heels in its hurry. Elara felt as if she were playing with a cart horse, expecting at any moment to be trampled. She darted round the thistle again. The puppy then began a series of short charges, running a very little way forward each time, then scuttling a long way back, barking hoarsely all the while. At last it sat down at a distance, panting, tongue lolling, eyes half shut with delight. This seemed to Elara an excellent opportunity to escape. She set off at once and ran until she was thoroughly tired and out of breath, until the puppy's bark had faded to a faint echo behind her. "And yet, what a dear little puppy it was," she said, leaning against a towering buttercup to rest and fanning herself with one of its leaves. "I should have loved to teach it tricks very much indeed, if only I had been the right size." She straightened. "Oh dear, I nearly forgot I must grow up again. Let me think. How am I to manage it? I suppose I must eat or drink something. But the question is, what?" That was indeed the great question. Elara looked all around at the grass and flowers, but could see nothing that looked suitable to eat or drink in such circumstances. Near her grew a large mushroom, about as tall as she was. She looked under it, then on both sides, then behind it. "I might as well see what is on top," she decided. She stood on tiptoe and peeped over the edge. Instantly her eyes met those of a large blue caterpillar, seated upon the cap with its arms folded, smoking a long hookah, and paying not the smallest attention to Elara, or to anything else. Chapter 5: Advice from a Caterpillar. Elara and the caterpillar regarded one another for some time without speaking. At last the caterpillar removed the hookah from its mouth and, in a languid, drowsy voice, addressed her. "Who are you?" This was not, by any measure, an encouraging way to begin a conversation. Elara answered rather shyly. I hardly know, sir, just at present. At least, I knew who I was when I got up this morning. But since then I believe I have been changed several times." "What do you mean by that?" said the caterpillar sternly. "Explain yourself." "I cannot explain myself. I am afraid, sir," said Elara. "Because I am not myself, do you see?" "I do not see," said the caterpillar. "I am afraid I cannot be clearer," Elara replied very politely. "I cannot understand it myself to begin with, and being so many different sizes in a single day is extremely confusing." "It is not," said the caterpillar. "Well," said Elara, "perhaps you have not found it so yet. But when you have to turn into a chrysalis, someday, and then afterward into a butterfly, I think you will feel it a little strange, will you not?" "Not in the least," said the caterpillar. "Perhaps your feelings differ from mine," Elara said. "All I know is that it would feel very strange to me." "You," said the caterpillar contemptuously. "Who are you?" Which brought them, rather annoyingly, back to the very start of their conversation. Elara felt a prickle of irritation at the caterpillar's extremely short remarks. She drew herself up and said very gravely, "I believe you ought to tell me who you are first." "Why?" said the caterpillar. That, again, was a perplexing question, and as Elara could think of no good reason at all, and as the caterpillar appeared to be in a decidedly unpleasant frame of mind, Elara turned away. "Come back," the caterpillar called after her. "I have something important to say." That certainly sounded promising. Elara turned and returned. "Keep your temper," the caterpillar advised. "Is that all?" said Elara, swallowing her irritation as best she could. "No," said the caterpillar. Elara decided she might as well wait. She had nothing else to do, and perhaps, after all, it would finally tell her something worth hearing. Several minutes drifted by in smoky silence. At last, it unfolded its arms, removed the hookah from its mouth again, and said, "So you imagine you have changed, do you?" "I am afraid I have, sir," said Elara. "I cannot remember things the way I used to, and I do not keep the same size for even 10 minutes together." "Cannot remember? What things?" asked the caterpillar. "Well, I tried to recite a poem about how the little busy bee behaves, but the words came out differently," Elara replied in a very melancholy voice. "Repeat," said the caterpillar. "You are old, Father William." Elara folded her hands and began, delivering a fully altered version that nevertheless kept the sense. "You are aged, Father William," the young fellow declared, "and your hair has turned startlingly white, yet you balance yourself upside down on your head. Are such capers at your years really right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared that my thinking might crack, but now that I am perfectly certain I have none left, I stand on my head and bounce back." "You are aged," the youth said, "as I mentioned before, and you have grown uncommonly stout, yet you spring a neat back somersault in at the door. By what trick do you carry this out?" "In my youth," said the sage, shaking locks that were gray, "I kept every joint limber and supple. With this ointment 1 shilling a box, by the way. Permit me to sell you a couple." "You are aged," said the youth, "and your jaws must be weak, fit for nothing much harder than suet. Yet you polish off goose with the bones and the beak. How in thunder do you manage to do it?" "In my youth," said his father, "I took up the law, and argued each cause with my wife. The jaw strength that gave me, through many a row, has served me the rest of my life." "You are aged," said the youth, "and your sight should be poor, yet you poise a live eel on your nose. How did you grow suddenly clever once more? What secret to brilliance arose?" I've answered 3 questions, and that is enough, said his father. Do not put on such airs. Do you fancy I listen all day to this stuff? Begone, or I'll boot you downstairs. That is not said correctly, the caterpillar observed. Not exactly right, I am afraid, Alara admitted timidly. Some of the words have been altered. It is wrong from beginning to end, the caterpillar said decisively. And then there was silence for several minutes. The caterpillar was the first to speak again. What size do you wish to be? It asked. I am not particular about size, Alara answered hastily. Only one does not enjoy changing so very often, you know. I do not know, said the caterpillar. Alara held her tongue. Never in her life had she been contradicted so frequently, and she felt her temper fraying. Are you content now? The caterpillar asked. Well, I should like to be a little larger, sir, if you would not mind, said Alara very politely. 3 inches is such a miserable height to be. It is a very good height indeed, said the caterpillar, angrily rearing itself upright as it spoke. It measured exactly 3 inches high. But I am not used to it, Alara pleaded in a piteous tone. And she thought privately, I do wish creatures would not be so very easily offended. You will become used to it in time, said the caterpillar. It put the hookah back into its mouth and began to smoke again. This time Alara waited patiently until it chose to speak. After a minute or two, the caterpillar removed the hookah once more, yawned once or twice, gave itself a shake, then slipped down from the mushroom and began to crawl away through the grass, merely remarking as it went, One side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter. One side of what? The other side of what? Alara asked herself. Of the mushroom, said the caterpillar, as if she had asked the question out loud. In another moment it had vanished. Alara stood gazing thoughtfully at the mushroom, trying to determine which edges counted as the 2 sides. And as it was perfectly round, she found this a very difficult matter indeed. At last, she stretched her arms as far around as she could and broke off a bit from the rim with each hand. Now, which is which? She said to herself, and nibbled a morsel of the piece in her right hand to test the effect. In the next instant she received a sharp blow beneath her chin. It had struck her foot. The change was so sudden that she was thoroughly alarmed, but there was not a second to waste. She was shrinking at a tremendous rate. She set to work at once upon the other fragment. Her chin was pressed so closely to her foot that there was scarcely room to open her mouth, but she managed at last to swallow a tiny crumb of the piece in her left hand. Splendid! Alara began, in a tone of delighted triumph, which shifted to panic immediately, for her shoulders had completely disappeared. All she could see when she looked down was an extraordinary length of neck, rising like a stalk above a sea of green leaves lying far below. What can all that green stuff be? Asked Alara. And where have my shoulders gone? Oh, my poor hands! Why can I not see you? She waggled them as she spoke, but the only result was a faint tremor among the distant foliage. Since there seemed to be no possibility of bringing her hands up to her head, she tried instead to bend her head down to them, and to her joy her neck curved easily in any direction, like a serpent's. She had just succeeded in shaping it into a graceful zigzag and was preparing to dive among the leaves, which turned out to be nothing but the tops of the trees she had been walking beneath, when a sharp hiss made her pull back in a hurry. A large pigeon had flown at her face and was beating its wings furiously. Serpent! Screamed the pigeon. I am not a serpent, said Alara indignantly. Leave me alone. Serpent, I say again, repeated the pigeon, though in a less shrill tone. Then, with a sob in it, I have tried everything, and nothing satisfies them. I have not the least idea what you are talking about, said Alara. I have tried the roots of trees, and I have tried banks, and I have tried hedges. The pigeon continued, paying her no attention. Those serpents, there is no pleasing them whatsoever. Alara grew more and more puzzled, but decided there was little use in speaking until the pigeon had finished its complaint. "If hatching the eggs were not trouble enough," the pigeon cried, "I must keep watch for serpents night and day. Why, I have not had a single wink of sleep in 3 weeks." "I am very sorry you have been so terribly annoyed," said Alara, who was beginning to grasp the situation. "And just when I had taken the highest tree in the entire wood," the pigeon went on, raising its voice to a shriek, "and just when I was thinking, serpent. But I am not a serpent, I tell you," said Alara. I am a, "Well, what are you?" demanded the pigeon. "I can see you are trying to invent something." I am a little girl," said Alara, rather doubtfully, remembering how many transformations she had undergone that day. "A likely story indeed," said the pigeon, with the deepest contempt. "I have seen a great many little girls in my time, but never one with a neck like that. No, you are a serpent, and there is no use denying it. I suppose you will tell me next that you have never tasted an egg." "I have tasted eggs, certainly," Alara answered. She was a very truthful child. "But little girls eat eggs just as much as serpents do, you know." "I do not believe a word of it," said the pigeon. "And if they do, then they are merely a kind of serpent. That is all I can say." This notion was so new to Alara that she was silent for a minute or two, which gave the pigeon the chance to add, "You are after eggs, I know that well enough. And what does it matter to me whether you are a little girl or a serpent?" "It matters a very great deal to me," said Alara quickly. "But I am not looking for eggs at this moment, and if I were, I should not want yours. I do not care for them raw." "Well then, be off," said the pigeon, sulkily settling back into its nest. Alara crouched among the trees as best she could, for her long neck kept getting tangled in the branches, and every now and then she had to stop and unwind it. After a while she remembered that she still clutched the 2 pieces of mushroom. She set to work very carefully, nibbling first at one and then at the other, growing sometimes taller and sometimes shorter, until at last she had brought herself down to her usual height. It had been so long since she had been anything near her proper size that it felt quite strange at first, but in a few minutes she grew accustomed to it and began talking to herself in her ordinary way. "Come, there is half my plan accomplished. How perplexing these changes are. I can never be certain what I shall be from one minute to the next. However, I am back to my right size. The next business is to reach that beautiful garden. How is that to be done, I wonder?" As she spoke, she came suddenly upon a small open space with a little house in it, about 4 feet high. "Whoever lives there," thought Alara, "it will never do to come upon them as I am. I should frighten them completely out of their wits." So she nibbled the piece in her right hand again, and did not venture anywhere near the house until she had brought herself down to 9 inches high. Chapter 6: Pig and Pepper. For a minute or two Alara stood studying the little house, wondering what step would make the best next step, when, quite suddenly, a footman in full livery burst out from the trees. She took him for a footman because his uniform looked very official indeed. Otherwise, judging by his features alone, she would have called him a fish. He rapped upon the door with his knuckles, loud and formal. It was opened by another liveried servant, this one with a round, broad face and very large eyes, rather like a frog. Both footmen, as Alara noticed, had powdered hair that curled all around their heads like froth. Curiosity tugged at her, so she crept from the shelter of the wood a little way to listen. The fish-like footman produced, quite ceremoniously, from beneath his arm a grand letter nearly as big as himself. He handed it over with a solemn announcement, "For the Lady Regent, an invitation from the Queen to play at croquet." The frog-like footman repeated the words in the very same solemn tone, only reversing the order just a little. "From the Queen, an invitation for the Lady Regent to play at croquet." They bowed very low at one another, and their curls interlaced. Alara laughed so heartily at this that she had to dart back among the trees to keep from being heard. When she peeped out again, the fish footman had disappeared, and the other sat on the ground by the door, staring up at the sky in a steady, foolish way. Alara approached timidly and knocked. "There is no use at all in knocking," said the footman, "and that for two reasons. First, because I am on the same side of the door as you are. Second, because the noise inside is so tremendous that no one could possibly hear you." Indeed, a most extraordinary racket filled the house. Continuous howling and sneezing, punctuated now and then by a mighty crash, as though a dish or kettle had been dashed to pieces. "Please, then," said Alara, "how am I to get in?" "There might be some sense in your knocking," the footman continued, paying her no real attention. "If we had the door between us. For example, if you were inside, you might knock, and then I could let you out, you know." He kept staring upward the whole time he spoke, which Alara judged decidedly rude, though perhaps he could not help it, his eyes being so very near the top of his head. "At any rate," she persisted aloud, "you might answer the question. How am I to get in?" "I shall sit here," the footman remarked, "till tomorrow." At that moment the door flew open and a large plate skimmed out, straight for the footman's nose. It just grazed him and shattered against a tree behind. "Or next day, maybe," the footman finished in the very same tone, as if nothing had occurred. "How am I to get in?" Alara asked again, louder. "Are you to get in at all?" said the footman. "That is the first question, you know." No doubt it was, though Alara did not enjoy being told so. "Dreadful," she muttered to herself. "The way all these creatures argue would drive one absolutely mad." The footman seemed to think it an excellent time to repeat himself with variations. "I shall sit here," he said, "on and off for days and days." "But what am I to do?" cried Alara. "Anything you like," said the footman, and began to whistle. "There is no use speaking to him," Alara said, quite desperate, and she opened the door and went in. The doorway opened straight into a great kitchen, thick with smoke from end to end. The Lady Regent sat on a three-legged stool in the middle, holding a baby. The cook bent over the fire, stirring a huge cauldron that seemed to be filled with soup. Certainly far too much pepper in that soup, Alara told herself. So far as she could manage to tell herself through the sneezing, there was far too much pepper in the air as well. Even the Lady Regent sneezed occasionally. The baby, meanwhile, alternated without pause between howling and sneezing. The only beings in the kitchen who did not sneeze were the cook and a very large cat sitting on the hearth, grinning from ear to ear. "If you please," said Alara, rather timid, unsure whether good manners allowed her to speak first, "would you tell me why your cat smiles like that?" "It is a Cheshire cat," said the Lady Regent. "That is why." "Pig." She shouted the last word with such sudden force that Alara jumped. But she saw at once the address was for the baby, not for her. So she took heart and continued. "I did not know that Cheshire cats always grin. In fact, I did not know cats could grin at all." "They all can," said the Lady Regent. "Most of them do." "I do not know of any that do," said Alara, very politely, pleased to have begun a conversation. "You do not know much," said the Lady Regent. "And that is that." Alara disliked the tone greatly and decided it would be wise to change the subject. While she searched for one, the cook lifted the cauldron off the fire and immediately set to hurling everything within reach at the Lady Regent and the baby. Fire irons first, then a shower of saucepans, plates, and dishes. The Lady Regent took no notice, even when an object struck her. As for the baby, it howled so loudly already that it was impossible to tell whether any blow had landed. "Oh, please, mind what you are doing," cried Alara, hopping up and down in sheer terror. "Oh, there goes its precious nose." A particularly large saucepan flew close by and nearly carried the little thing away. "If everybody minded their own business," growled the Lady Regent hoarsely, "the world would go round much faster than it does." "That would not be an advantage," said Alara, very glad of a chance to display a little knowledge. "Just consider what confusion it would make with day and night. You see, The Earth takes 24 hours to turn once upon its axis. Speaking of axes, said the Lady Regent. Off with her head! Elara glanced anxiously at the cook to see whether she meant to take the hint. But the cook was busy stirring the soup and did not seem to be listening. So Elara continued, bravely, 24 hours, I think? Or is it 12? Do not pester me, said the Lady Regent. I have never been able to abide figures. With that, she started nursing the child, crooning a sort of lullaby and giving it a shake at the end of every line. The cook and the baby joined the chorus while the Lady Regent sang a second verse that was, to be frank, very rude indeed. She tossed the baby up and down so violently that Elara could hardly catch the words for all the howling. Here, hold it a while if you like, said the Lady Regent suddenly, flinging the baby at Elara. I must go and dress for croquet with the sovereign. And she hurried from the room. The cook hurled a frying pan after her. It missed by an inch. Elara caught the baby with difficulty, for it was a strangely formed creature, flinging out arms and legs in all directions. Like a starfish, thought Elara. It snorted like a little steam engine the moment she took it. It kept doubling and straightening itself so restlessly that, for the first minute or two, it was as much as she could do to keep hold of it. Once she discovered the proper method, twisting it up into a kind of knot and then holding fast to its right ear and left foot to keep it from undoing itself. She carried it out into the fresh air. If I do not take this child away, thought Elara, they will surely kill it within a day or two. To leave it behind would be very nearly murder. She said the last words aloud. The little creature grunted in reply. By now the sneezing had ceased. Do not grunt, said Elara. That is not at all a proper way to express yourself. It grunted again. Elara peered anxiously into its face to see what might be amiss. There could be no doubt. It had a very turned-up nose, more like a snout than a child's nose. Its eyes were growing extremely small besides. Altogether, Elara did not like the look of it. Perhaps it is only sobbing, she thought, and looked again to see if there were tears. No. Not a single tear. If you are going to turn into a pig, my dear, said Elara quite seriously, I shall have nothing further to do with you. Mind that. The poor little thing sobbed or grunted. It was impossible to be sure which. They went on that way in silence for some minutes. Elara had just begun to wonder what on earth she ought to do with the creature when she got it home, when it grunted so violently that she looked down in alarm. This time there was no mistaking it. The child was not a child. It was a pig. To carry it any farther would be absurd. She set the little creature on its feet and was relieved to see it trot off quietly among the trees. If it had grown up, she said to herself, it would have made a dreadfully ugly child, but it makes rather a handsome pig. She began thinking over other children she knew who might do well as pigs, and was just saying to herself, if only one knew the proper way to change them, when she was startled to see the Cheshire Cat sitting on a branch a few yards away. The cat merely grinned when it saw Elara. It looked good-natured enough, she thought. Still, its claws were very long and it had a great many teeth, so she felt it ought to be treated with respect. Cheshire Puss? She began timidly, unsure whether it would like the name. It only grinned a little wider. Well, so far so good, thought Elara. She continued, would you be so kind as to tell me which way I ought to go from here? That depends a good deal on where you wish to arrive, said the cat. I do not much care where, said Elara. Then it does not much matter which way you go, said the cat. So long as I get somewhere, Elara added by way of explanation. Oh, you are sure to do that, said the cat. If only you walk long enough. Elara could not deny the logic. She tried a different inquiry. What sort of people live about here? In that direction, said the cat, waving its right paw, lives a hatter, and in that direction, it added, waving the other paw, lives a March hare. Visit either you like, both are mad. I do not want to go among mad people, Elara protested. You cannot help it, said the cat. "We are all mad here. I am mad, you are mad." "How do you know I am mad?" said Alara. "You must be," said the cat, "or you would not have come here." Alara did not think that proved anything, but she pressed on. "And how do you know that you are mad?" "To begin with," said the cat, "a dog is not mad, you grant that?" "I suppose so," said Alara. "Well then," said the cat, "a dog growls when it is angry and wags its tail when it is pleased. I growl when I am pleased and wag my tail when I am angry. Therefore I am mad." "I call it purring, not growling," said Alara. "Call it what you like," said the cat. "Do you play croquet with the sovereign today?" "I should like to, very much," said Alara. "But I have not been invited." "You will see me there," said the cat, and vanished. Alara was not much surprised. She was growing used to wonders. As she was still looking at the place where it had been, it appeared again. "What became of the baby?" asked the cat. "I nearly forgot to ask." "It turned into a pig," Alara said calmly, as if the cat had returned in the most natural way. "I thought it would," said the cat, and vanished once more. Alara waited a little, half expecting it again. When it did not appear, she set off in the direction where the March hare was said to live. "I have seen hatters before," she told herself. "The March hare will be more interesting. And as this is May, perhaps it will not be raving mad, at least not as mad as it is in March." As she said this, she looked up, and there was the cat again, perched on a branch. "Did you say pig or fig?" asked the cat. "I said pig," replied Alara. "And I wish you would not keep appearing and vanishing so suddenly. It makes one quite giddy." "All right," said the cat. This time it vanished very slowly, beginning at the tail and ending with the grin, which remained some while after the rest had gone. "I have often seen a cat without a grin," thought Alara. "But a grin without a cat, this is the most curious thing I have ever seen in all my life." She had not gone far before she came in sight of the March hare's house. She was sure it must be the place, because the chimneys were shaped like ears, and the roof appeared to be thatched with fur. The house was so large that she did not dare approach until she had nibbled a little more of the left-hand piece of mushroom, raising herself to about 2 feet high. Even then she walked forward rather timidly. "Suppose it should be raving mad after all," she murmured. "I almost wish I had gone to the Hatters instead." Chapter 7. A Mad Tea Party. A long table was set beneath a tree in front of the house. The March hare and the Hatter were taking tea. A dormouse sat between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, resting their elbows upon it and talking over its head. "Very uncomfortable for the dormouse," thought Alara. "Only, as it is asleep, I suppose it does not mind." The table was large, but the three had crowded themselves into one corner. "No room, no room," they cried when they saw Alara coming. "There is plenty of room," said Alara indignantly, and she sat down in a great armchair at one end. "Have some wine," said the March hare, in an encouraging tone. Alara looked round the table. There was nothing on it but tea. "I do not see any wine," she observed. "There is none," said the March hare. "Then it was very uncivil of you to offer it," Alara said, growing angry. "It was very uncivil of you to sit down without being invited," said the March hare. "I did not know it was your table," said Alara. "It is laid for far more than 3. "Your hair wants cutting," said the Hatter. He had been staring at Alara for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first remark. "You should learn not to make personal comments," Alara said, with some severity. "It is very rude." The Hatter opened his eyes very wide at this. All he said, however, was, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" "Ah, we shall have some fun now," thought Alara. "Riddles. I am glad they have begun." Aloud she added, "I believe I can guess that." "Do you mean you think you can discover the answer to it?" asked the March hare. "Exactly so," said Alara. "Then you should say what you mean." The March Hare went on. I do, Elara said hastily. At least, I mean what I say, that is the same thing, you know? Not the same thing a bit, said the Hatter. You might just as well say I see what I eat is the same as I eat what I see. You might just as well say, added the March Hare, I like what I get is the same as I get what I like. You might just as well say, murmured the Dormouse, who appeared to be talking in its sleep, I breathe when I sleep is the same as I sleep when I breathe. It is the same thing with you, said the Hatter. And at this point the conversation dropped, and the party sat silent for a minute. The company sat in silence for a full minute, while Elara rummaged through everything she could recall about ravens and writing desks, which, if she were honest, was not very much at all. The Hatter was first to break the hush. What day of the month is it? He asked, turning to Elara. He had taken a watch from his pocket and was eyeing it uneasily, shaking it now and then and holding it to his ear. Elara thought a moment. The 4th, she said. 2 days slow, pronounced the Hatter. Told you butter would never suit the works, he added, glaring at the March Hare. It was the very best butter, the March Hare replied meekly. Yes, yes, but some crumbs must have got in as well, grumbled the Hatter. You should not have put it in with the bread knife. The March Hare took the watch, regarded it gloomily, dipped it into his cup of tea, then looked at it again. Finding nothing better to offer, he repeated his original defense. It was the best butter, you know. Elara, peering over his shoulder with genuine curiosity, said, What an odd watch. It tells the day of the month and does not say what o'clock it is. Why should it? Muttered the Hatter. Does your watch tell you what year it is? Of course not, Elara answered readily. That is because it stays the same year for so very long together. Precisely the case with mine, said the Hatter. Elara felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to carry no sensible meaning, and yet it was certainly English. I do not quite understand you, she said as politely as she could. The Dormouse is asleep again, said the Hatter, and he sprinkled a little hot tea upon its nose. The Dormouse shook its head peevishly and, without opening its eyes, said, Of course, I was going to remark, the Hatter resumed, turning to Elara. Have you solved the riddle yet? No, I give it up, Elara replied. What is the answer? Not the faintest idea, said the Hatter. Nor I, said the March Hare. Elara sighed, tired already. I think you might do something better with the time, she said, than waste it asking riddles that have no answers. If you knew time as well as I do, said the Hatter, you would not talk about wasting it. He is a him. I do not know what you mean, said Elara. Of course you do not, said the Hatter, tossing his head contemptuously. I dare say you have never even spoken to time. Perhaps not, Elara replied cautiously. But I know I must beat time when I learn music. Ah, that explains it, said the Hatter. He will not stand being beaten. Now, if you kept on good terms with him, he would do almost anything you pleased with the clock. Suppose it were 9 o'clock in the morning, just time to begin lessons. Why, you would only whisper a hint to time, and round goes the clock in a twinkling to 1:30. Time for dinner. I only wish it were, muttered the March Hare under his breath. That would certainly be grand, Elara admitted thoughtfully. But then I should not be hungry for it, you see. Not at first, perhaps, said the Hatter. But you could keep it to 1:30 as long as you liked. Is that how you manage? Elara asked. The Hatter shook his head mournfully. Not I. We quarreled last March, just before he indicated the March Hare with his teaspoon. Went mad, you know. It was at the grand concert given by the Queen of Hearts. I had to sing, Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder what you're at. You know the song, perhaps? He asked. I have heard something like it, said Elara. It goes on, the Hatter continued. Up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle. Here the Dormouse shook himself and began droning in his sleep. Twinkle, twinkle. And continued so long that they had to pinch him to make him stop. Well, I had hardly finished the first verse, said the Hatter, when the Queen sprang up and shouted, "He is murdering the time! Off with his head!" "How dreadfully savage!" exclaimed Alara. And ever since then, the Hatter went on in a mournful tone. "He will not do a single thing I ask. It is always 6 o'clock now." A bright notion came to Alara. "Is that why there are so many tea things set out?" she asked. "That is it," sighed the Hatter. "It is always tea time, and we have no time to wash the cups in between." "Then you keep moving round, I suppose?" said Alara. "Exactly so," said the Hatter, "as the cups get used up." "But what happens when you come back to the beginning?" Alara ventured. "I propose we change the subject," the March Hare interrupted with a yawn. "I am tired of this. I vote that the young lady tells us a story." "I am afraid I do not know any," said Alara, alarmed at the proposal. "Then the Dormouse shall," they cried together. "Wake up, Dormouse!" And they pinched it on both sides at once. The Dormouse slowly opened its eyes. "Wasn't asleep," it said in a hoarse, feeble voice. "Heard every word you fellows were saying." "Tell us a story," said the March Hare. "Yes, please do," pleaded Alara. "And be quick about it," said the Hatter, "or you will be asleep again before it is done." "Once upon a time there were 3 little sisters," began the Dormouse in great haste. "And their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly, and they lived at the bottom of a well." "What did they live on?" asked Alara, who always took keen interest in matters of food and drink. "They lived on treacle," said the Dormouse, after thinking for a minute or two. "They could not have done that," Alara said gently. "They would have been ill." "So they were," said the Dormouse. "Very ill." Alara tried to imagine how such an extraordinary way of living would work, but it puzzled her too much. So she asked, "But why did they live at the bottom of a well?" "Take some more tea," urged the March Hare very earnestly. "I have not had anything yet," said Alara, offended. "So I cannot take more." "You mean you cannot take less," said the Hatter. "It is very easy to take more than nothing." "Nobody asked your opinion," said Alara. "Who is making personal remarks now?" the Hatter asked triumphantly. Alara did not quite know how to answer that. She helped herself to some tea and bread and butter, then turned back to the Dormouse and repeated, "Why did they live at the bottom of a well?" The Dormouse took another minute to think, then said, "It was a treacle well." "There is no such thing," Alara began angrily, but the Hatter and the March Hare both shushed her, and the Dormouse added silkily, "If you cannot be civil, you had better finish the story yourself." "No, please go on," Alara said humbly. "I will not interrupt again. I dare say there may be one treacle well." "One indeed," said the Dormouse indignantly. Nevertheless, it consented to continue. "They were learning to draw, you know." "What did they draw?" asked Alara, quite forgetting her promise not to interrupt. "Treacle," said the Dormouse, without pausing to consider. "I want a clean cup," the Hatter declared. "Let us all move one place on." He moved as he spoke. The Dormouse followed him. The March Hare slid into the Dormouse's place, and Alara, rather unwillingly, took the March Hare's seat. The Hatter alone gained by the change. Alara was worse off than before, as the March Hare had just upset the milk jug into his plate. Alara did not wish to offend the Dormouse again, so she began very cautiously, "I do not understand. Where did they draw the treacle from?" "You can draw water out of a well," said the Hatter. "So I should think you could draw treacle out of a treacle well." "They were in the well," Alara reminded the Dormouse. "Of course they were," said the Dormouse. This answer so thoroughly confused her that she let the Dormouse proceed uninterrupted for some time. They were learning to draw. It went on, yawning and rubbing its eyes, for it was becoming very sleepy. And they drew all manner of things, everything that begins with an M. Why with an M? Said Alara. Why not? Said the March Hare. Alara fell silent. The Dormouse had closed its eyes now and was sliding back into a doze. But being pinched by the Hatter, it woke with a little squeak and continued. That begins with an M, such as mousetraps and the moon and memory and muchness. You know you say things are much of a muchness. Did you ever see a drawing of muchness? Truly now you ask me, said Alara, very much confused. I do not think. Then you should not talk, said the Hatter. This rudeness was more than Alara could bear. She rose in high disgust and walked away. The Dormouse fell asleep instantly. Neither of the others paid the least attention to her departure, though Alara looked back once or twice, half hoping they would call her. The last sight she had of them, they were attempting to stuff the Dormouse into the teapot. At any rate, I shall never go there again, Alara said, picking her way through the wood. It is the stupidest tea party I have ever attended in all my life. Just then she noticed that one of the trees had a door set right into it. That is very curious, she thought. But then again, everything is curious today. I may as well go in at once. And in she went. Once more she found herself in the long hall, close by the little glass table. Now I shall manage better this time, she told herself, and began by taking the little golden key and unlocking the tiny door that led to the garden. Then she nibbled at her mushroom, a piece of which she had kept in her pocket, until she was about a foot high. She walked down the low passage, and at last found herself in the beautiful garden, among bright flower beds and cool, whispering fountains. Chapter 8. The Queen's Croquet Ground. Near the entrance stood a large rose tree. The roses upon it were white, but 3 gardeners were busy painting them red. Alara thought this wonderfully strange and moved closer to watch. As she came up, she heard one say, Look out now, 5. Do not go splashing paint over me like that. I couldn't help it, said 5 sulkily. 7 jogged my elbow. That is right, 5, said 7, looking up. Lay the blame on others, as usual. You had better not talk, said 5. I heard the Queen say only yesterday that you deserved to be beheaded. What for? Demanded 2, the one who had spoken first. That is none of your business, 2, said 7. Yes, it is his business, said 5. And I shall tell him. It was for bringing the cooked tulip roots instead of onions. 7 flung down his brush. Well, of all the unjust. He broke off, for his eye had just fallen on Alara standing there. The others looked round. All 3 bowed very low. Would you tell me, said Alara a little timidly, why you are painting those roses? 5 and 7 said nothing but stared at 2, who began in a low voice. Why, the fact is, miss, this here ought to have been a red rose tree, and we planted a white one by mistake. If the Queen finds out, we shall all have our heads cut off, you know. So you see, miss, we are doing our best before she comes. At that moment 5, who had been anxiously peering across the garden, cried, The Queen! The Queen! The 3 gardeners instantly threw themselves flat upon their faces. There came the sound of many footsteps. Alara turned to see. First marched 10 soldiers carrying clubs. They were shaped exactly like the gardeners, oblong and flat, with hands and feet at the corners. Next came 10 courtiers, all sprinkled with diamonds, walking 2 and 2 as the soldiers had done. After these came the royal children. 10 of them little darlings, hopping merrily in pairs, all adorned with hearts. Then came the guests, mostly kings and queens. Among them Alara recognized the pale hair, chattering nervously, smiling at everything, and passing by without noticing her. After these followed the Knave of Hearts, bearing the king's crown on a crimson velvet cushion. Last of all, in this splendid procession, came the King and Queen of Hearts. Alara wondered whether she ought to lie down as the gardeners had done. but she could not remember any rule that required spectators at a procession to lie on their faces. And besides, she thought, what would be the use of a procession if everyone lay down and could not see it? So she stood where she was and waited. When the procession reached Alara, they stopped and looked her over. "Who is this?" the queen demanded severely. She addressed the Knave of Hearts, who only bowed and smiled. "Idiot!" snapped the queen, tossing her head. Then, turning to Alara, she said, "What is your name, child?" "My name is Alara, if it please your majesty," said Alara very politely, but she added inwardly, "Why, they are only a pack of cards after all. I need not be afraid of them." "And who are these?" asked the queen, pointing to the 3 gardeners lying round the rose tree. As they lay upon their faces and the pattern on their backs matched the rest of the pack, she could not tell whether they were gardeners, soldiers, courtiers, or even 3 of her own children. "How should I know?" said Alara, surprised at her own courage. "It is no concern of mine." The queen flushed crimson with fury. After glaring at Alara like a wild creature, she screamed, "Off with her head!" "Nonsense!" cried Alara, very loud and very firm. The queen fell silent. The king laid a timid hand upon her arm. "Consider, my dear," he said softly. "She is only a child." The queen turned angrily away from him. "Turn them over," she ordered the knave. The knave, using one foot with extreme care, flipped the gardeners onto their backs. "Get up!" shrilled the queen. The 3 gardeners sprang to their feet and began bowing to the king, the queen, the royal children, the guests, indeed to everyone. "Leave off that!" screamed the queen. "You make me giddy." Then, turning to the rose tree, "What have you been doing here?" "If it please your majesty," said Tu in a very humble tone, dropping to one knee as he spoke, "we were trying." "I see," said the queen, who meanwhile had been examining the roses. "Off," she moved on, and 3 soldiers remained to execute the unfortunate gardeners. They ran straight to Alara for protection. "You shall not be beheaded," said Alara, and she popped them into a large flower pot standing nearby. The 3 soldiers wandered about for a minute, searching, then quietly marched after the rest. "Are their heads off?" the queen shouted. "Their heads are gone, if it please your majesty," the soldiers bellowed back. "That is right," cried the queen. "Can you play croquet?" The soldiers remained silent and glanced at Alara, since the question was clearly for her. "Yes," Alara shouted. "Come on, then," roared the queen, and Alara joined the moving throng, wondering very much what would come next. It is a very fine day," said a timid voice at her elbow. She found herself walking beside the pale hare, who was peering anxiously into her face. "Very," said Alara. "Where is the lady regent?" "Hush, hush," said the pale hare in a low, hurried tone. He glanced nervously over his shoulder as he spoke, and then rose onto tiptoe, brought his mouth close to her ear, and whispered, "She is under sentence of execution." "What for?" said Alara. "Did you say, 'What a pity'?" the pale hare asked anxiously. "No, I did not," said Alara. "I do not think it is a pity at all. I said, 'What for?'" "She boxed the queen's ears," the pale hare began. Alara gave a little cry of laughter. "Oh, hush!" the pale hare whispered in a frightened tone. "The queen will hear you. Get to your places," thundered the queen. People began rushing in every direction, colliding and stumbling. In a minute or 2, however, they were arranged and the game commenced. Alara thought she had never seen such a peculiar croquet ground in all her life. The turf lay in ridges and furrows. The balls were living hedgehogs, the mallets were living flamingos, and the soldiers had to double themselves and stand on hands and feet to form the arches. Her chief difficulty at first was managing her flamingo. She could tuck its body snugly under her arm with its legs dangling, but whenever she got its neck nicely straight and was about to give the hedgehog a proper tap with its head, the bird would twist around and stare up at her with such a puzzled, deeply personal expression that she could not help bursting into laughter. And when she finally coaxed its head downward again and prepared to begin in earnest, she discovered, very provokingly, that the hedgehog had uncurled and was already crawling away. Besides all that, there always seemed to be a ridge or a furrow exactly in the direction she meant to send the ball. And the doubled-up soldiers who served as arches kept standing up and wandering off to other parts of the ground. Alara soon concluded it was a very difficult game indeed. All the players played at once without waiting for turns. They quarreled continuously. They fought over the hedgehogs, and in very short order the queen was in a furious passion, stamping and shouting, "Off with his head!" or "Off with her head!" about once every minute. Alara began to feel most uneasy. True, she had had no direct quarrel with the queen thus far, but she knew it could happen at any instant, and then, "What will become of me?" she thought. "They are dreadfully fond of beheading people here. The great marvel is that anyone at all is left alive." She was scanning for some avenue of escape and wondering whether she could slip away unnoticed when she perceived something curious forming in the air. It puzzled her at first. After a minute's watching, she recognized it as a grin. "The Cheshire Cat," she said to herself. "Now I shall have someone to talk to." "How are you getting on?" said the cat as soon as there was enough mouth to speak with. Alara waited until the eyes appeared and then nodded. "It is no use speaking to it," she thought, "until its ears have arrived, or at least one ear." In another moment, the entire head emerged, and Alara set her flamingo down, very glad to have a listener, and began to recount the game. The cat seemed to think there was now quite enough of it visible. No more of it appeared. "I do not think they play fairly at all," Alara began in a complaining tone. "They quarrel so dreadfully one cannot hear oneself speak. They do not seem to have any rules in particular, or if there are any, nobody attends to them. And you have no idea how confusing it is when everything is alive. For example, the arch I am to pass through next is walking about at the far end of the ground, and I would have croqueted the queen's hedgehog just now, only it ran away when it saw mine coming." Chim. "How do you like the queen?" asked the cat in a low voice. "Not at all," said Alara. "She is so extremely." At that moment she realized the queen stood directly behind her, listening, so she continued smoothly, "Likely to win that it is hardly worth finishing the game." The queen smiled and moved on. "Who are you talking to?" said the king, approaching Alara and peering with great curiosity at the cat's head. "It is a friend of mine, Cheshire Cat," said Alara. "Allow me to present it." "I do not like the look of it at all," said the king. "Nevertheless, it may kiss my hand if it wishes." "I would rather not," the cat remarked. "Do not be impertinent," said the king. "And do not look at me like that." He edged behind Alara as he spoke. "A cat may look at a king," said Alara. "I have read that in some book, though I cannot recall which." "Well, it must be removed," the king declared firmly. He hailed the queen, who chanced to be passing. "My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed." The queen had only one way of settling all difficulties, great or small. "Off with its head," she said, without so much as looking around. "I shall fetch the executioner myself," said the king eagerly, and hurried away. Alara thought she might as well see how the game was going, for she could hear the queen's voice shrieking with rage in the distance. Already 3 players had been sentenced to execution for missing their turns. Alara disliked the look of things very much, especially as the game was in such confusion that she never knew whether it truly was her turn or not. She went to find her hedgehog, which was engaged in combat with another hedgehog. This seemed to Alara an excellent opportunity to croquet one with the other, only her flamingo had strayed to the far side of the garden, where Alara could see it ineffectually trying to fly up into a tree. By the time she had recaptured the bird and returned, the hedgehog battle was over and both combatants had vanished. "Well, it hardly matters," Alara thought, for all the arches on her side of the ground had walked off, She tucked the flamingo under her arm to prevent further escape and went back to converse with her friend. When she returned to the Cheshire Cat, she was surprised to find a large crowd gathered. A dispute was in full force among the executioner, the king, and the queen. They all spoke at once, while the rest stood miserably silent. The moment Alara appeared, all three appealed to her to settle the matter, and they repeated their arguments. Since they spoke simultaneously, Alara found it very hard to make out what was being said. At last she distinguished the points. The executioner insisted he could not cut off a head unless there was a body attached to cut it from. He had never had to attempt such a thing before, and he was not going to begin at this time of life. The king contended that anything with a head could be beheaded, and that the executioner should not talk nonsense. The queen argued that if the thing were not done in less than no time, she would have everyone executed all around. This last remark was what made the entire company look so grave and anxious. Alara could think of nothing better to say than, "It belongs to the Lady Regent. You had better ask her about it." "She is in prison," said the queen to the executioner. "Fetch her here." Off he sped like an arrow. The cat's head began to fade the moment he disappeared, and by the time he returned with the Lady Regent, it had vanished entirely. The king and the executioner ran wildly up and down, hunting for it, while the rest drifted back to the game. Chapter 9. The Mock Turtle's Story. "I cannot tell you how very glad I am to see you again, you dear old thing," said the Lady Regent. She tucked her arm affectionately into Alara's, and they walked away together. Alara was relieved to find her in so pleasant a humor and thought it must have been the pepper. Yes, surely the pepper, that had made her so savage in the kitchen. "When I am a duchess," she told herself, not very hopefully, "I shall keep every grain of pepper out of my kitchen. Soup is perfectly good without it. Perhaps it is pepper that makes people hot-tempered." She grew quite pleased at discovering a new general rule. "And vinegar makes people sour. Chamomile makes them bitter. Barley sugar and such things make children sweet-tempered. If only everyone knew, then they would not be so stingy about giving them to us." She had quite forgotten the Lady Regent for the moment and was a little startled when a voice close to her ear said, "You are thinking about something, my dear, and that makes you forget to talk. I cannot tell you just now what the moral of that is," the Lady Regent added, "but I shall remember it shortly." "Perhaps it has no moral," Alara ventured. "Fiddlesticks," said the Lady Regent. "Everything has a moral, if only you can find it." She squeezed herself closer to Alara's side as she spoke. Alara did not much like being pressed so near. First, because the Lady Regent was very ugly. Second, because she was exactly the right height to rest her chin on Alara's shoulder, and it was a very sharp chin indeed. Still, Alara disliked rudeness and bore it as well as she could. "The game is going somewhat better now," Alara said, merely to keep the conversation alive. "So it is," said the Lady Regent. "And the moral of that is, 'tis love that makes the world go round." "Somebody whispered to me," Alara said, "that it is done by everybody minding their own business." "Well, it comes to much the same," said the Lady Regent, digging her sharp chin into Alara's shoulder as she added, "And the moral is, take care of the sense and the sounds will take care of themselves." How fond she is of finding morals in everything, Alara thought. "I dare say you are wondering why I do not put my arm round your waist," the Lady Regent said after a pause. "The reason is, I am uncertain about the temper of your flamingo. Shall I try the experiment?" "He might bite," Alara said cautiously, not at all eager to be experimented upon. "Very true," said the Lady Regent. "Flamingos and mustard both bite, and the moral of that is, birds of a feather flock together." "Only mustard is not a bird," Alara observed. "Right as usual," said the Lady Regent. "And you have quite a neat way of putting things. It is a mineral, I think." "Of course it is," she hurried on, as if agreeing with herself. "There is a large mustard mine near here, and the moral is, the more there is of mine, the less there is of yours." "Oh, I know," cried Alara, who had not listened to this last flourish. "It is a vegetable. It does not look like one, but it is." "I quite agree," said the Lady Regent. "And the moral of that is, be what you would seem to be, or, to say it more elaborately, never imagine yourself not to be otherwise than what it might appear to others, that what you were or might have been was not otherwise than what you had been would have appeared to them to be otherwise." "I think I should understand that better," Alara said politely, "if I had it written down. As it is, I cannot quite follow it." "That is nothing to what I could say if I chose," said the Lady Regent, pleased with herself. "Pray, do not trouble to say any more," Alara answered. "Do not speak of trouble," said the Lady Regent. "I make you a present of everything I have said thus far." "A curious sort of present," thought Alara. "I am glad birthday gifts are not like that." But she did not dare say it aloud. "Thinking again?" asked the Lady Regent, giving another dig with her sharp little chin. "I have a right to think," Alara said sharply. She was beginning to feel worn very thin. "About as much right," said the Lady Regent, "as pigs have to fly, and the moral." Here, to Alara's astonishment, the Lady Regent's voice died away in the middle of her favorite word, and the arm linked through Alara's began to tremble. Alara looked up. The Queen stood before them, arms folded, brow dark as a thundercloud. "A fine day, Your Majesty," the Lady Regent began weakly. "Now, I give you a warning," the Queen shouted, stamping her foot. "Either you or your head must be off, and that in about half no time. Take your choice." The Lady Regent chose, and vanished on the instant. "Let us go on with the game," said the Queen to Alara. Alara was far too frightened to reply and followed slowly back to the croquet ground. The other guests had taken advantage of the Queen's absence to rest in the shade. But at the very sight of her, they hurried back to the game, the Queen remarking that any moment's delay would cost them their lives. Throughout the play, the Queen never ceased quarreling and shouting, "Off with his head!" or "Off with her head!" Those condemned were taken into custody by the soldiers, who, of course, had to leave off being arches to do so. So that, by the end of half an hour or so, there were no arches left, and all the players, except the King, the Queen, and Alara, were prisoners under sentence of execution. Then the Queen, quite out of breath, paused and said to Alara, "Have you seen the mock turtle yet?" "No," said Alara. "I do not even know what a mock turtle is." "It is the thing mock turtle soup is made from," said the Queen. "I never saw one, nor heard of one," said Alara. "Come along, child," said the Queen, "and he shall tell you his story." As they walked away together, Alara heard the King say to the company at large, in a low voice, "You are all pardoned." That is a mercy, Alara thought. She had been unhappy at the number of executions the Queen had ordered. Very soon they came upon a griffin lying fast asleep in the sun. If you do not know what a griffin is, you must look at a picture of one. "Up, lazy creature," said the Queen. "Take this young lady to see the mock turtle and to hear his history. I must return and attend to certain executions I have ordered." And she marched off, leaving Alara alone with the griffin. Alara did not altogether like the creature's look, yet she thought it as safe to remain with it as to follow the fierce Queen, so she waited. The griffin sat up, rubbed its eyes, and watched the Queen until she was out of sight. Then it chuckled. "What fun!" said the griffin, half to itself and half to Alara. "What is fun?" asked Alara. "Why, you know," said the griffin, "it is all her fancy. They never execute anybody, you see. Come on." Everyone says, "Come on." Here, Alara thought as she followed more slowly. I have never in all my life been ordered about, so never. They had not gone far when they saw the mock turtle in the distance, seated sad and solitary upon a rocky ledge. As they drew near, Alara could hear him sighing as if his heart would break. She felt the deepest pity. "What is his sorrow?" she asked the griffin. "It is all his fancy," the griffin answered, much as before. He has not any sorrow, you know. Come on. They approached the Mock Turtle, who turned toward them with great eyes full of tears. He said nothing. This here young lady, said the Griffin. She wants to know your history, she does. I shall tell it to her, said the Mock Turtle in a deep, hollow voice. Sit down, both of you, and do not speak a word till I have finished. So they sat down, and no one spoke for several minutes. Alara thought, I do not see how he can ever finish if he will not even begin. Yet she waited, patient as a stone. At one time, said the Mock Turtle at last, with a cavernous sigh, I was a real turtle. Another long silence followed, broken only by the Griffin's occasional exclamations and by the Mock Turtle's steady, heavy sobbing. Alara was very nearly getting to her feet to say, Thank you, sir, for your most interesting account. But she could not quite believe that was truly all, so she sat still and kept quiet. When we were very small, the Mock Turtle resumed at last, more composed now, though a little sob escaped now and then. We went to school in the sea. Our master was an old turtle. We used to call him Tortoise. Why did you call him Tortoise if he was not one? Alara asked. We called him Tortoise because he taught us, snapped the Mock Turtle. You are very dull indeed. You ought to be ashamed to ask such a simple question, said the Griffin, and both turned their eyes upon poor Alara till she felt quite ready to sink into the earth. At last the Griffin said to the Mock Turtle, Drive on, old fellow, do not dawdle, and the other continued, Yes, yes, we went to school in the sea, though you may not believe it. I never said I did not, Alara put in. You did, said the Mock Turtle. Hold your tongue, added the Griffin, and before Alara could reply, the Mock Turtle went on. We had the very best of educations. In fact, we attended school every day. I have been to a day school too, said Alara. You need not be so very proud about that. With extras? The Mock Turtle inquired rather anxiously. Yes, said Alara. We learned French and music. And washing, said the Mock Turtle. Certainly not, Alara cried, indignant. Ah, then yours was not much of a school, said the Mock Turtle, sounding vastly relieved. At ours, at the bottom of the bill. French, music, and washing extras. You could not have wanted it much, living on the seafloor, Alara observed. I could not afford it, sighed the Mock Turtle. I only took the regular course. What was that? Asked Alara. Reeling and writhing, to begin with, the Mock Turtle replied, and then the various branches of arithmetic. Ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision. I have never heard of uglification, Alara ventured. What is it? The Griffin threw up both paws. What? Never heard of making things uglier? You know what it is to beautify, I suppose? Yes, Alara said, a little unsure. It means to make something prettier. Well then, said the Griffin, if you do not know the opposite, you are quite silly. Alara did not feel encouraged to ask more on that point. She turned to the Mock Turtle instead. What else had you to learn? Well, there was mystery, said the Mock Turtle, ticking off subjects on his flippers. Ancient and modern with geography. Then drawing. The drawing master was an old conger eel who came once a week. He taught us trawling, stretching, and fainting in coils. What was that like? Said Alara. I cannot show you myself, said the Mock Turtle. I am too stiff. I never landed, said the Griffin. No time. I went to the classics master, though he was an old crab. I never went to him, sighed the Mock Turtle. They said he taught laughing and grief. So he did, said the Griffin, also sighing. And both creatures covered their faces with their paws. How many hours a day did you have lessons? Alara asked, eager to change the subject. 10 the first day, said the Mock Turtle. 9 the next, and so on. What a curious plan, exclaimed Alara. That is why they are called lessons, remarked the Griffin, because they lessen from day to day. This struck Alara as quite a new idea, and she considered it a little before making her next remark. Then the 11th day must have been a holiday. Of course it was, said the Mock Turtle. And how did you manage on the 12th? Alara pressed, bright with interest. That is enough about lessons. The Griffin cut in very decidedly. Tell her something about the games. Chapter 10. The Lobster Quadrille. The Mock Turtle heaved a deep sigh and drew the back of one flipper across his eyes. He looked at Alara and tried to speak, but for a minute or two his voice was choked with sobs. Just as if he had a bone in his throat, said the Griffin, and set to shaking the Mock Turtle and patting him on the back. At last the Mock Turtle recovered his voice, and with tears still streaming down his cheeks, went on. You may not have spent much time under the sea. I have not, said Alara. And perhaps you were never even introduced to a lobster? Alara began. I once tasted but checked herself in haste and said, No, never. Then you can have no idea how delightful the lobster quadrille is, said the Mock Turtle. None at all, said Alara. What sort of dance is it? Why, said the Griffin, first you form into a line along the seashore. 2 lines, cried the Mock Turtle. Seals, turtles, salmon, and so on. Then you clear away the jellyfish, the Griffin interrupted. That generally takes some time. You advance twice, continued the Mock Turtle. Each with a lobster as a partner, cried the Griffin. Of course, said the Mock Turtle. Advance twice, set to partners, change lobsters and retire in the same order, continued the Griffin. Then, the Mock Turtle proceeded. Throw the lobsters, shouted the Griffin, leaping in the air. As far as you can, said the Mock Turtle. Swim after them, screamed the Griffin. Somersault in the sea, cried the Mock Turtle, capering wildly. Change lobsters again, yelled the Griffin at the top of his voice. Back to land, and that is the first figure, said the Mock Turtle, suddenly dropping his voice. The 2 creatures, who had been bounding about like mad things, sat down again very sadly and quietly, and looked at Alara. It must be a very pretty dance, Alara said timidly. Would you like to see a little of it? Asked the Mock Turtle. Very much indeed, said Alara. Come, let us try the first figure, said the Mock Turtle to the Griffin. We can do without lobsters, Which of us shall sing? Oh, you sing, said the Griffin. I have forgotten the words. So they began solemnly dancing round and round Alara, every now and then treading on her toes as they passed too close, and waving their 4 paws to mark the time, while the Mock Turtle sang, very slowly and very sadly. Will you walk a little faster? Said a whiting to a snail. There's a porpoise close behind us, and he's treading on my tail. See how eagerly the lobsters and the turtles all advance. They are waiting on the shingle. Will you come and join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, won't you join the dance? You can hardly form a notion how delightful it will be when they take us up and throw us with the lobsters out to sea. But the snail replied, too far, and gave a look askance. He thanked the whiting kindly, but he would not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not join the dance. Would not, could not join the dance. What matters it how far we go? His scaly friend replied. There is another shore, upon the other side. The farther off from England, the nearer is to France. Then turn not pale, beloved snail, but come and join the dance. Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, won't you join the dance? Thank you. It is a very interesting dance to watch, said Alara, exceedingly glad it was over at last. And I do so like that curious song about the whiting. Oh, as to whitings, said the Mock Turtle. You have seen them, of course? Yes, said Alara, for she knew them to be a tasty sort of fish. I have often seen them at sup. She stopped herself just in time before saying supper. I do not know where sup may be, said the Mock Turtle. If you have seen them so often, of course you know what they are like. I believe so, said Alara thoughtfully. They have their tails in their mouths, and they are all over breadcrumbs. You are wrong about the crumbs, said the Mock Turtle. They would all wash off in the sea. But they do have their tails in their mouths, and the reason is— He yawned and shut his eyes. Tell her the reason and all that, he said to the Griffin. The reason is, said the Griffin, they would go with the lobsters to the dance, so they were thrown out to sea, so they had to fall a long way, so they got their tails fast in their mouths, so they could not get them out again. That is all. Thank you, said Alara. It is very interesting. I never knew so much about a whiting before. I can tell you more if you like, said the Griffin. Do you know why it is called a whiting? I never thought about it, said Alara. Why, it does the boots and shoes, said the Griffin very solemnly. Alara was thoroughly puzzled. Does the boots and shoes? She repeated in a wandering tone. What are your shoes blacked with? Asked the Griffin. I mean, what makes them shiny and polished? Alara looked down at them and considered before answering. They are done with shoe black, I believe. Yes, with blacking. Boots and shoes under the sea. The Griffin went on in a deep voice. Are done with a whiting, now you know. And what are they made of? Soles and eels, of course, replied the Griffin, rather impatiently. Any child knows that soles and eels. If the whiting said to the porpoise, come with us, they had to have him. Alara mused, still thinking of the song. No wise fish goes anywhere without a porpoise, said the Mock Turtle. Really? Alara cried, greatly surprised. Why, if a fish came to me and told me he was going on a journey, said the Mock Turtle, I should ask, with what porpoise? Do you not mean purpose? Said Alara. I mean what I say, the Mock Turtle answered in an offended tone. The Griffin added, come, let us hear some of your adventures. I can tell you my adventures, beginning from this morning, said Alara a little timidly. But there is no use going back to yesterday because I was a different person then. We shall explain all that, began the Mock Turtle. No, the adventures first, said the Griffin, impatient. Explanations take such a dreadful time. So Alara began to tell them her adventures from the moment she first saw the pale hair. She felt a little nervous at first, for the two creatures had drawn quite close, one on each side, and opened their eyes and mouths very wide. But she gained courage as she went on. They remained perfectly silent until she reached the part about reciting, You are old, Father William, to the caterpillar, and how the words all came out differently. Then the Mock Turtle drew a long breath and said, Very curious as can be, agreed the Griffin. All came different, the Mock Turtle repeated thoughtfully. I should like to hear her try and repeat something now. Tell her to begin, he said to the Griffin, as though the creature had some authority over Alara. Stand up and repeat. 'Tis the voice of the sluggard, said the Griffin. How they do order one about and make one say lessons, thought Alara. I might as well be back at school. Nevertheless, she stood up and began. But her head was so full of the lobster quadrille that she scarcely knew what she was saying, and the words came very strangely indeed. 'Tis the voice of the lobster. I heard him declare, You have baked me too brown. I must sugar my hair. As a duck with its eyelids, so he with his nose trims his belt and his buttons and turns out his toes. When the sands are all dry, he is gay as a lark, and will talk in contemptuous tones of the shark. But when tides begin rising and sharks gather round, his voice becomes timid and tremulous of sound. That is different from what I used to say when I was a child, Alara remarked. Well, I never heard it before, said the Mock Turtle, but it sounds uncommon nonsense. Alara said nothing. She sat down with her face in her hands. wondering if anything would ever happen in a natural way again. "I should like it explained," said the Mock Turtle. "She cannot explain it," the Griffin said quickly. "Go on with the next verse." "What about his toes?" the Mock Turtle persisted. "How could he turn them out with his nose?" "Why, that is the first position in dancing," said Alara. But the whole thing had grown dreadfully confusing, and she longed to change the subject. "Go on with the next verse," repeated the Griffin impatiently. "It begins, 'I passed by his garden.'" Alara did not dare disobey, though she felt sure it would all come wrong. She continued, with a trembling voice, "I passed by his garden and marked with one eye how the owl and the panther were sharing a pie. The panther took pastry and gravy and meat, while the owl had the dish as his share of the treat. When the pie was all finished, the owl, as a boon, was kindly permitted to pocket the spoon, while the panther received knife and fork with a growl, and concluded the banquet. Oh, merciless fowl! What is the use of repeating all that stuff?" the Mock Turtle broke in. "If you do not explain it as you go, it is by far the most confusing thing I ever heard." "Yes, I think you had better leave off," said the Griffin, and Alara was only too glad to do so. "Shall we try another figure of the lobster quadrille?" the Griffin went on. "Or would you like the Mock Turtle to sing you a song?" "Oh, a song, please, if the Mock Turtle would be so kind," Alara said so eagerly that the Griffin remarked, rather offended, "Humph, there is no accounting for taste. Sing her turtle soup, old fellow." The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and began, sometimes choking with sobs, to sing, "Beautiful soup, so rich and green, waiting in a hot tureen. Who for such dainties would not stoop? Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, who cares for fish, game, or any other dish? Who would not give all else for two? Pennyworth only of beautiful soup. Pennyworth only of beautiful soup." "Chorus again!" cried the Griffin, and the Mock Turtle had just begun to repeat when a cry sounded in the distance. "The trial is beginning! Come on!" cried the Griffin, and seizing Alara by the hand, he hurried off, not waiting for the end of the song. "What trial is it?" Alara panted as she ran. "Come on," was all the Griffin answered, running faster. Fainter and fainter, borne on the breeze behind them, came the melancholy refrain. "Soup of the evening, beautiful soup." Chapter 11. Who stole the tarts? The King and Queen of Hearts were seated upon their throne when they arrived, with a great crowd gathered round, all sorts of little birds and beasts, as well as the entire pack of cards. The knave stood before them in chains, with a soldier on either side. Near the king was the pale hare, with a trumpet in one paw and a scroll of parchment in the other. In the very middle of the court stood a table, and upon it rested a large dish of tarts. The tarts looked so very tempting that merely seeing them made Alara quite hungry. If only they would finish this trial, she thought, and pass the refreshments. But there seemed little hope of that, so she began examining everything around her to pass the time. Alara had never been inside a court before, though she had read about such places in books. She was rather pleased to find she could name nearly everything. The judge, she told herself. That great wig must belong to him. The judge, incidentally, was the king himself, and as he wore his crown on top of the wig, he looked neither comfortable nor dignified. And that, thought Alara, must be the jury box. Those 12 creatures are, I suppose, the jurors. She was obliged to say creatures, for some were animals and some were birds. She whispered the word jurors to herself 2 or 3 times, rather proud to use it. Rightly so, she thought. Very few girls her age knew what it meant at all. All 12 jurors were writing furiously on their slates. What can they be doing? Alara murmured to the griffin. Nothing has happened yet. They are writing down their names, the griffin whispered back, for fear they might forget them before the trial ends. Stupid things, Alara began, quite loudly and indignantly, but stopped at once, for the pale Hare cried, "Silence in court!" And the king put on his spectacles and peered anxiously about to see who had spoken. Alara could see the slates almost as well as if she were over the jurors' shoulders. Most of them were carefully writing stupid things, and she could even make out that one of them did not know how to spell stupid, and had to nudge his neighbor for help. A fine muddle their notes will be before this is over, thought Alara. One juror possessed a pencil that squeaked. Naturally, Alara could not endure that. She circled the court, slipped behind him, and soon found her chance to remove it. She did it so quickly that the poor little juror, it was Bill the Lizard, could not imagine what had become of it. After searching in vain, he was forced to write with his finger for the rest of the day, of very little use, as it left no mark on the slate. "Herald, read the accusation," said the king. The pale Hare blew 3 blasts upon his trumpet, unrolled the parchment, and read, "Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer's day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts, and took them quite away. Consider your verdict," the king told the jury. "Not yet, not yet," the pale Hare cried in haste. "There is a great deal to come before that. Call the first witness." The pale Hare sounded 3 blasts again and called, "First witness." The first to appear was the Hatter. He entered with a teacup in one hand and a slice of bread and butter in the other. "I beg your pardon, your majesty," he began, "for bringing these in, but I had not quite finished my tea when I was sent for." "You ought to have finished," said the king. "When did you begin?" The Hatter looked at the March Hare, who had come into court arm in arm with the Dormouse. "The 14th of March, I think it was," he said. "15th," said the March Hare. "16th," added the Dormouse. "Write that down," said the king to the jury, and they eagerly wrote all 3 dates, then added them together and converted the total into shillings and pence. "Remove your hat," said the king. "It is not mine," said the Hatter. "Stolen," cried the king, turning to the jury, who instantly made a note of it. "I keep them to sell," the Hatter explained. "I have none of my own. I am a Hatter." Here the queen put on her spectacles and began staring at him so hard that he turned pale and fidgeted. "Give your evidence," said the king, "and do not be nervous, or I shall have you executed on the spot." This was not encouraging. The Hatter shifted from foot to foot, glanced uneasily at the queen, and, in his confusion, bit a large piece out of his teacup instead of the bread and butter. Just then Alara felt a very curious sensation. It puzzled her for a moment, until she realized she had begun to grow again. At first she thought she had better rise and leave the court. On second thought she decided to remain where she was as long as there was room. "I wish you would not squeeze so," squeaked the Dormouse next to her. "I can hardly breathe." "I cannot help it," said Alara meekly. "I am growing." "You have no right to grow here," said the Dormouse. "Nonsense," said Alara, bolder now. "You know you are growing too." "Yes, yes, but I grow at a reasonable pace," said the Dormouse. "Not in that ridiculous fashion." He got up, very sulky, and scuttled to the other side of the court. All this time the queen had never stopped staring at the Hatter, and just as the Dormouse crossed the floor, she said to one of the officers, "Bring me the list of the singers at the last concert." The wretched Hatter trembled so hard both his shoes shook off. "Your evidence?" the king repeated angrily. "Or I will have you executed whether you are nervous or not." "I am a poor man, your majesty," the Hatter began in a trembling voice. "I had not begun my tea, not above a week or so, and what with the bread and butter getting so thin, and the twinkling of the tea." "The twinkling of the what?" said the king. "It began with a T," the Hatter replied. "Of course twinkling begins with a T," snapped the king. "Do you take me for a fool? Go on." "I am a poor man," the Hatter repeated. And most things twinkled after that. Only the March Hare said, "I did not," said the March Hare very quickly. "You did," said the Hatter. "I deny it," said the March Hare. She denies it, said the king. Leave that part out. Well, at any rate, the Dormouse. The Hatter glanced anxiously to see if the Dormouse would deny anything too, but the Dormouse denied nothing, being fast asleep. After that, the Hatter continued, I cut more bread and butter. What did the Dormouse say? Asked one of the jurors. That I cannot remember, said the Hatter. You must remember, said the king, or I will have you executed. The miserable Hatter dropped cup and bread and butter, fell to one knee and began, I am a poor man, your majesty. You are a very poor speaker, said the king. At this, one of the guinea pigs cheered, and was immediately suppressed by the court officers. As that is rather a hard word, I will explain. They had a large canvas bag, tied at the mouth with strings. They popped the guinea pig in headfirst and sat upon it. I am glad I have seen that done, thought Alara. I have so often read in the newspapers at the end of trials. There was some attempt at applause which was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court, and I never knew what it meant till now. That is all you know about it. You may stand down, said the king. I cannot go any lower, said the Hatter. I am on the floor as it is. Then you may sit down, replied the king. Here the other guinea pig cheered and was suppressed. Well, that disposes of the guinea pigs, thought Alara. Now we shall get on better. I would rather finish my tea, said the Hatter, casting a frightened look at the queen, who was studying the list of singers. You may go, said the king, and the Hatter hurried out of court without even stopping to put on his shoes. Fetch him back, added the queen to an officer. But the Hatter was out of sight before the officer reached the door. Call the next witness, said the king. The next witness proved to be the Lady Regent's cook. She carried a pepper box in her hand, and Alara guessed who it was even before she entered, from the way everyone near the door began sneezing at once. Give your evidence, said the king. Shan't, said the cook. The king looked anxiously at the pale hare, who whispered, Your Majesty must cross-examine this witness. If I must, I must, sighed the king. Folding his arms and frowning at the cook until his eyes were nearly out of sight, he asked, in a deep voice, What are tarts made of? Pepper mostly, said the cook. Treacle, said a sleepy voice behind her. Collar that dormouse, shrieked the queen. Behead that dormouse. Turn that dormouse out of court. Suppress him. Pinch him. Off with his whiskers. For several minutes the whole court was in uproar as they dealt with the dormouse, and by the time order returned, the cook had vanished. Never mind, said the king with a great sigh of relief. Call the next witness. Then, under his breath to the queen, Really, my dear, you must cross-examine the next. Watching gives me a headache. Alara watched the pale hare fumble with the list, keen to see what the next witness would be, for they have hardly any evidence, she told herself. Imagine her astonishment when the pale hare piped, in his small, shrill voice, the name Alara. Chapter 12. Alara's Evidence. Here, cried Alara, forgetting, in the flurry of the moment, how very large she had grown in the last few minutes. She sprang up so quickly that the hem of her skirt struck the jury box. Over it went, and all 12 jurors spilled headlong onto the crowd below. There they lay, floundering and scrambling in a most undignified heap, reminding Alara, painfully, of a glass globe of goldfish she had upset the previous week. I am terribly sorry, she exclaimed, distressed, and she began setting them to rights as fast as she could, for the thought of the fishbowl kept invading her mind, and she had a vague but urgent notion that the jurors, like fish, must be gathered up and put back at once or they might die. The trial cannot proceed, said the king in a very solemn voice, until all the jurors are restored to their proper places. He repeated it with great emphasis, staring hard at Alara as he did so. Alara glanced into the box and discovered that in her haste she had reinserted the lizard head downward. The poor little creature was dangling by its heels, tail waving in dreary fashion, quite unable to help itself. She soon set it right. Not that it signifies much, she thought. It would be just as useful one way up as the other. When the jurors had somewhat recovered from the shock of being overturned, and their slates and pencils had been found and returned, they fell to work industriously, each writing out a full account of the accident. All except the lizard, who seemed too overcome to do anything but sit with mouth agape, staring at the ceiling. "What do you know of this matter?" the king demanded of Alara. "Nothing," said Alara. "Nothing whatever?" pressed the king. "Nothing whatever," Alara repeated. "That is very important," pronounced the king, turning to the jury. They had just begun to write this down when the pale hair interposed respectfully. "Unimportant, your majesty. He means unimportant," he said, frowning and contorting his face at the king as he spoke. "Unimportant, of course I meant," the king said hurriedly. Then, in an undertone, he muttered to himself, "Important, unimportant, unimportant, important," as though trying which sounded best. Some jurors wrote important, some unimportant. Alara, close enough to peek over their slates, saw the confusion and thought, "It makes no difference in the least." At that moment the king, who had been scribbling in a notebook for some time, rang out, "Silence!" and read aloud, "Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high must leave the court." Everyone looked straight at Alara. "I am not a mile high," said Alara. "You are," said the king. "Nearly 2 miles, added the queen. "Well, I shall not go in any case," said Alara. "Besides, that is not a real rule. You invented it this very minute." "It is the oldest rule in the book," said the king. "Then it ought to be number 1, said Alara. The king turned pale and snapped the notebook shut. "Consider your verdict," he told the jury in a low, trembling voice. "There is more evidence to come yet." "Please, your majesty," cried the pale hair, leaping up in great haste. "This paper has just been found." "What is in it?" asked the queen. "I have not opened it yet," said the pale hair. "But it appears to be a letter, written by the prisoner to someone." "It must be so," said the king. "Unless it was written to nobody, which is not usual, you know." "To whom is it addressed?" asked one of the jurors. "It is not addressed at all," said the pale hair. "In fact, there is nothing written on the outside." He unfolded the paper as he spoke and added, "It is not a letter after all. It is a set of verses." "Are they in the prisoner's handwriting?" inquired another juror. "No," said the pale hair, "and that is the strangest part." The jury looked thoroughly puzzled. "He must have imitated somebody's hand," said the king confidently. The jury brightened at once. "Please, your majesty," said the knave, "I did not write it, and they cannot prove I did. There is no name signed at the end." "If you did not sign it," said the king, "that only makes it worse. You must have meant mischief, or you would have put your name like an honest man." There was general applause at this. It was the first truly clever thing the king had said all day. "That proves his guilt," said the queen. "It proves nothing of the sort," said Alara. "You do not even know what the verses are about." "Read them," said the king. The pale hair put on his spectacles. "Where shall I begin, please, your majesty?" "Begin at the beginning," said the king gravely, "and go on till you come to the end, then stop." These were the verses he read. "They told me you had been to her, and mentioned me to him. She gave me quite a character, said I could hardly swim. He sent them word I had not gone. We know that to be true. If she should push the matter on, what would become of you? I gave her 1. They gave him 2. You sent us 3 or more. They all came back from him to you, though they were mine before. If I or she should chance to be involved in this affair, he trusts to you to set them free, exactly as we were. My notion was that you had been, before she had this fit, a thing that came to stand between himself and us, and it. Do not let him suspect she liked them best. This still must be a secret kept from all the rest, between yourself and me. It is the most important piece of evidence we have heard yet, said the king, rubbing his hands together. So now let the jury. Alara had grown so tall in the last few minutes that she was not at all afraid to interrupt. If any one of them can explain what that means, she said, I shall give him 6 pence. I do not believe there is an atom of sense in it. The jurors all wrote on their slates, she does not believe there is an atom of sense in it, but not one attempted an explanation. If there is no meaning, said the king, that saves us a world of trouble because there is none to find. And yet, he spread the verses on his knee and peered at them with one eye. I seem to find some meaning after all. Said I could hardly swim. Ah, he turned to the knave. You cannot swim, can you? The knave shook his head sadly. Do I look as though I could? Indeed, being made entirely of cardboard, he certainly did not. All right so far, said the king. He muttered on over the lines. We know that to be true. That is the jury, of course. I gave her 1. They gave him 2. Plainly what he did with the tarts, you know. But it continues, said Alara. They all came back from him to you. Why, there they are, cried the king triumphantly, pointing at the tarts upon the table. Nothing could be clearer. Then again, before she had this fit, the king went on. My dear, he said to the queen, you have never had fits, I think? Never, roared the queen, and flung an inkstand at the lizard as she said it. Poor little Bill, who had abandoned writing with his finger, having found it left no mark, now hastily began again, using the ink that trickled down his face, so long as it lasted. Then the words do not fit you, said the king, smiling around the court. Dead silence. It is a pun, the king added in an offended tone, and everybody laughed. Let the jury consider their verdict, said the king for about the 20th time that day. No, no, said the queen. Sentence first, verdict afterward. Stuff and nonsense, Alara said loudly. What a ridiculous idea. Sentence first. Hold your tongue, shrieked the queen, turning purple. I will not, said Alara. Off with her head, screamed the queen at the top of her voice. No one moved. Who cares for you? Said Alara, who by this time had reached her full stature. You are nothing but a pack of cards. At that, the whole pack rose into the air and came whirling down upon her. She gave a little scream, half fright, half fury, struck out with her hands to beat them away, and found herself lying on the riverbank, her head in her sister's lap. Her sister was gently brushing away a few dead leaves that had fluttered down upon Alara's face. Wake up, Alara dear, said her sister. Why, what a long nap you have had. Oh, I had such a curious dream, said Alara, and she told her sister, as well as she could remember, everything about her strange adventures you have just heard. When she had finished, her sister kissed her and said, It was a curious dream indeed, dear, but now run in to tea. It is getting late. So Alara got up and raced away, thinking as she ran, quite properly, what a wonderful dream it had been. But her sister remained, just where Alara had left her, her head resting on her hand, gazing at the sinking sun and thinking of the little dreamer and all her marvelous adventures, until she too began, in her own way, to dream. First she dreamed of little Alara herself. Again the small hands were folded upon her knee, and the bright, eager eyes looked up into her own. She could hear the very tones of the child's voice, and see that odd little toss of the head to fling back the wandering hair that would always slip into her eyes. And as she listened or seemed to listen, the whole place around her grew alive with the creatures of her sister's dream. The long grass rustled at her feet as the pale hare scurried by. A frightened mouse splashed through a nearby pool. She heard the rattle of teacups as the March Hare and his friends carried on their everlasting meal, and the queen's thin, piercing cry ordering her unfortunate guests off to execution. Once more the pig baby sneezed on the Lady Regent's knee, while plates and dishes crashed around. Again the griffin's harsh squawk, the lizard's squeaking slate, and the muffled struggles of the suppressed guinea pigs filled the air, and mingled with these came the mock turtle's mournful songs. So she sat with closed eyes, half believing herself in that wonderland, though she knew that if she simply opened them, everything would change to ordinary daylight. The grass would be only the wind's rustle, the pool only the reed's gentle ripple. The clatter of cups would become the tinkling of sheep bells, the queen's shriek, the shepherd boy's call. The baby's sneeze, the griffin's cry, and all the other strange noises would turn, she knew, into the cheerful confusion of a busy farmyard. And, far away, the lowing of cattle would take the place of the mock turtle's heavy sighs. Lastly, she pictured how this same little sister, in after years, would herself be a grown woman, and how she would keep, through all the ripeness of her life, the simple and loving heart of her childhood. How she would gather other little ones about her, making their eyes shine and their faces glow with many a strange tale, perhaps even with the old dream of Wonderland, and how she would feel with all their simple sorrows and find delight in all their simple joys, remembering her own child life and all its happy summer days.